Yeah. Go ahead, Chair.
Yeah. Okay then, ladies and gentlemen, ready to start the meeting? Okay guys, ready to start the meeting? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, right, so welcome ladies and gentlemen to the planning committee being held at 6 PM on the 20th. 2001. Obviously, you can be aware that we're having a meeting here this evening at the South East Essex College due to issues with the council chamber. We have no mics, so everyone speak nice, loudly and clearly. In addition to that, obviously, as this meeting is being held closing at 9:30, which was at 3.5 hours time, so conclude business at that time. So there's obviously quite a large agenda. We're going to do our best to try and get through it as best we can. I have a quick word with Lee. We're going to try and keep the presentations nice and crisp, officer responses nice and crisp, and then as for members, it takes as long as it takes. You know, the more questions, the more things go. We're going to have a little look at things at 9 o'clock, take stock of the situation, because obviously if there's a few more items left, we might, you know, if it's obvious that we're not going to get to obviously be able to update the agents that are here. Okay, so with that, we'll now move on to actually opening up the agenda here this evening. And with that takes us to apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence? Grace?
Yes, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Byrne, Steve Taylor, and I presume Councillor Churchman as Councillor Ackenbone is here substituting in his place.
Okay, thank you. I don't think there's anyone else is present, so there's no issues there. Okay, with that, we're looking at the minutes of the meeting found on pages 5 to 14. Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? No hands raised. Okay, so we're happy to agree those, yeah? Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. Items of urgent business, there are none. Declarations of interest. Okay, so right now I'm only after declarations of interest, not declarations of correspondence. Councillor Howden.
Item 11, Chair, the info application for Wolf Road. I live in Wolf Road myself. It's a non-pecuniary interest. I'm at the very bottom of Wolf Road. This application does not affect my property at all, so I can approach the application in that way.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Watson.
The Culver Centre, item 10. This doesn't affect my property. I'll back straight onto this development. I've also campaigned actively against building on the green space that's at the back, so I will withdraw from the discussion.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Polly and Councillor Fletcher.
On item 13, it's a pecuniary interest. I work with the NHS, the applicant's daughter also works with the NHS, but I've took advice and it should.
So it's okay for me to sit in on that?
Yeah, no, thank you. And I did receive your email, so thanks for that. Let us know. Councillor Fletcher.
Thanks, Chair. This is just to mention that Grace and I were in touch earlier on in the week because having initially been involved with some of the local local discussions about Culver Centre, I did, this was originally asked Matthew Bolton whether I would be regarded as having an interest. I think we've agreed that as I've since been engaging with the development team, I can say if somebody I'm in mind on one side or the other, I'll be judging on his merits.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. And Councillor Pickler.
Regarding item 9, Council Car Park. Prior to being a member of this planning committee, I previously commented on at the request of the residents and shopkeepers standing over my role as a elected councillor. I understand any decision I make tonight must be based purely on tonight's submissions, so I've not predetermined any judgment on this matter.
Yeah. All right then. Okay, so that now takes us on to declarations of receipt of any correspondence. Now, I received an email from Nick Westlake. That was in relation to item 12, but I've not responded to any of those emails. Outside that, I've not had anything else.
Same, Chair.
So you happy yet?
I had a phone call from the agent at 210069, if you will.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. All right then, so we'll now go on to planning appeals, found on page 15 to 22. Do you have any questions on any of the appeals? Lee, do you have anything to add? Nothing to add. Questions on appeals, no? Okay. Excellent. All right then. So item 7 is obviously the public address to the committee, which allows us to discuss the 6 items in front of us this evening. And that takes us to the first item, 8, which is land adjacent to 10 Farms Lane, pages 23 to 82. This is obviously the third item. Councillor Howden, I understand you want to comment on this one? No, and the same with yourself, Councillor Ackenbooth. You won't be voting on this one, but everyone else, I think, is clear to vote. Yes, is that correct? Yeah.
Chair, I think Councillor Ackenbrown was present for the first hearing of that, this item.
Yes, she was she?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll double check that now in the
Okay,
minutes.
Yeah. Oh, I'll give you a couple of minutes to double check that. So, what did you do the first time? So, solar farm?
It was on July, 15th July. I'll check that now.
Yeah, I wasn't sure.
Councillor Houghton wasn't present then.
No, we established that, yeah.
Yes, but that little was because she was the one who found that. So Councillor Lee was up to the church and Councillor.
Yeah, Councillor Ackenbone was
Yeah.
here.
Perfect.
All right, can we not check on the papers?
Yeah, no, we've got
Yeah.
that, Councillor Fletcher. So, Councillor Ackenbooth, yeah, can take part in this.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right then. So, all right then. If we'd like to crack on with that one, and Lucy, could you present your report? Thank you.
Okay, so, yeah, as the chair said, this item, can everyone hear me? Although my voice isn't carried very well. Is that, yeah? Cool. Okay, so this application was deferred from July committee for amendment 5, which took place on the 7th of September. That is 18 in so it's a cross-borough, cross-boundary application, but the actual solar panels themselves are in borough in the site area of 138 hectares. But it's fortunate that only 75% of that is actually covered by solar panels. Okay, so this is the solar panel. The maximum height of those panels is 3 metres, and they track the part. Me. Oh, right, okay, sorry. And ecology measures which the proposal incorporates. This includes new and enhanced hedgerows, new woodlands and grasslands, which will increase the biodiversity net gain. Okay, and next is some, might be hard to see, but this is, if you were standing in Harrow Lane, facing southwest, so the actual junction of by the way. So this is as the view at present, and noticing that well, so any of the information this view that you post solar panel. This is another one of the view points, which is this is as it is present, and this is how it
So is one along the site boundary. This is present from the site is within Greenbelt and would not with exceptions in appropriate development sets out in the NPPF and local policy. Therefore, it would result in definition of openness. The applicant and circumstances that amount to very special circumstances overcome some factors via very special circumstances were assessed in the original report, paragraph 6.27. And the balancing exercise of these very special circumstances summarised in paragraph 6.54 of the original report. And it's considered that significant weight should be attached to the benefits of providing renewable energy and the reduction in carbon emissions. The temporary nature of the development and weight can also be attached to economic, social and environmental benefits of the proposals. So on balance, it's concluded benefits of the proposal clearly outweigh substantial harm to the group. And to touch on the this is justified. The application required an environmental impact with matter of landscape and objective. But the area being so that's just the summary slide, and the no objections around the means boundaries or airways with appropriate. I'm going to go back over.
Yeah, thank you. Okay then, questions? Does anyone have any questions based on our site visit? I'll go for the first one. So obviously, we obviously asked a lot of questions on that site visit. One of the ones that I was concerned about was these battery storage facilities. Obviously, on page 26, point 3.6. You've gone over the sort of the battery safety management. It says here it's considered to be minimised to an acceptable level. And obviously, there's a detailed battery safety management plan. Acceptable level?
I suppose that's the agent can say nothing when there's electricity involved. It can't be 100%. Can't say there won't ever be an issue, but it's highly unlikely with the battery storage. So, agent with the applicant goes site visit is national grid at the level of safety conscious they have to have to connect into the national grid. So important. Yeah, high there.
Yeah. Okay. And just looking back a little bit further on the report, I've never once seen it. Has the Essex Fire Brigade ever been spoken to about this? Have you ever got an opinion from them? I mean, effectively, there was ever an issue, they'd be the ones that have to deal with potential for that. No, they've not been contacted or.
No, I don't think they were consulted.
Okay. All right, nice. Any further questions, Councillor Piccolo?
Yeah, just at the end of the 5-year term, will it revert back to Greenbelt then? Because then we had a previously developed then.
It will revert back to open Greenbelt. And there's conditions to cover.
Yeah, what I'm looking at is no one will be able to use the fact that it has had this generators on there for a reason for releasing it from the Greenbelt, which is building or whatever else.
No.
Yeah, Chair, if I can add, the Greenbelt designation wasn't changed.
Yeah, I just wonder they couldn't use this development or temporary development as a reason for negating
No, but if, I mean, get the point you make, if, for example, permission was granted, for example, when it was implemented, 5 years, change, the economics change, for example, they decided to remove solar panels, it wouldn't change the green belt status of the land, because conditions 3 and 4 basically required decommissioning. So even before, and the way they're written, even before the vote expiring, they would still need to control the terms of that. So if something did change, and you'd probably expect, I mean, there's always going to be demand.
Yeah, no, I get that.
It wouldn't change the policy status of the site.
It wasn't so much whether they were doing it, just that once they decommissioned it and moved off site, another developer come along and say, well, you've had it's been used previously, it's no longer free. As long as I've got the assurance that that wouldn't be the case, wouldn't be a legitimate argument, they could still put other arguments for development, but they couldn't use that, give any weight to their opinion.
No, that'd be judgment individual.
Would it lose its deferral status because that's not the agricultural land for the
I think Lucy can pick up the point about agricultural land classification.
There's different land level land classification, as
Yes.
Matt said. So this is grade 2. This is 3B, which takes it, so it's not the best and most versatile land. So its loss isn't kind of protected in DEFRA terms. That wouldn't change, it would still be 3B agricultural land.
and that hasn't been.
Or, yeah,
That's fine.
Okay, any further questions? No? Okay. It's one more even to Matt and Lucy. So I'll be honest, I'm still nervous over the technologies being used, but I suppose in the planning terms, what we've been told here by themselves is that it's safe. So we give approval to this. We're confident as a council that this technology is safe. Because I'll be honest with you, I'm still tempted to grab the opinion of the fire brigade and maybe an independent expert, but obviously, planning point of view, I think we've done everything we can to sort of go over that technology. Is there a way, if we approved it here this evening, that we could get them engaged in the process going forward, get them to, so to give it approval, engage with the fire brigade so they're aware of what they're dealing with going forward?
that's no problem.
Yeah,
I don't know whether they're engaged. So.
Chair, we do occasionally consult the fire brigade, and it's more likely that they'd be interested in, for example, a new residential development, a new commercial development. They would look at provision of fire hydrants, access for appliances. Can they get a fire appliance into the development so they can get it close to buildings? So the detailed layout they'd be interested in. We wouldn't ordinarily consult them on something like a solar farm. I mean, I think as a planning authority, we can be as satisfied as we can be. There are operational solar farms in the borough. There are operational solar farms throughout the country, and I'm not aware, anecdotally, of any problems with combustion or anything like that. And the one thing that I've found something. I'm talking to another potential battery storage developer for another site, and they advised me that actually the thresholds, and this is the point made at the site was at the last committee meeting, the applicant's gone for 49.9 megawatt because there's a 50 megawatt threshold. Above that, it becomes an application for the development consent order. The rules have changed purely for battery storage, and there was a bit of paperwork provided for Lucy a bit earlier, and basically the government ran a consultation for purely battery storage facilities. There's no threshold, and there's a fairly strong encouragement for this sort of technology. Lucy will have the precise wordings, but I read it in the executive summary. There's a strong government steer that battery storage is a way forward for clean secure energy. So you could perhaps infer from that that a very, very wide scale, the big picture is there isn't a concern about the safety of the technology. I mean, the executive summary, the first paragraph is probably the clincher on that, I think.
All right, okay.
Also, there's quite a lot of purely battery storage developments which are wouldn't your attention. So, there's a number of those. And there's not been any issues with those.
Lee, did you want to come in and then I'll go to Councillor Lee?
Thank you, Chair. I guess just cutting to the chase there. So there's a recommended condition number 15 which requires details of the energy storage systems that will be introduced. Listening to your concern, Chair, through the discharge of that condition, we can certainly see advice from the fire service if that would ease your mind on that particular point. Yeah.
I was just thinking that maybe the battery storage is actually in favouring. Is it not?
No.
No.
It's just the wire that's
Councillor Watson?
Just one more question, probably to you, Matt. Is on 3.6, you're talking about an OBSM being put through as an outline business case, and at the same time, before they go ahead and they build anything, I'm assuming you're going to need the detailed battery safety management plan, aren't you? And then, in order to
Sorry,
do
3.6 the update.
yeah, the 3.6 in the update, they're going to, they've submitted an outline business safety management plan, haven't they, on the battery, and at the same time, you're going to require a detailed battery safety management plan to be submitted and approved. On the council side, who's going to be the due diligence that's going to ensure that those match to what the requirements should be to give satisfaction to the members, and also like that there is no risk averse on any of it?
That would be our environmental.
So are they qualified to do that? Or will you need to go and get an independent person, as this is something that we haven't done before, and it's a specialist kind of work? Would you go and get somebody in to do that due diligence on there to give us satisfaction that it's been carried out by somebody?
Well, I think going back to the point the chair made at the beginning, the consultative, so that it's fairly common practice for, at this stage on an application, for an applicant to put in a strategy. So for drainage or landscaping or any number of things, they put in a strategy of how the detail will be to set the parameters. So they put in their thinking, their initial thinking about how that would be dealt with, but the condition would then drive down the detail. It seems to me that when we got, if permission is granted, when we get that submission to discharge the condition, the fire brigade could be a consultee, for example. They may have a view about, are the measures effective?
That's what I'm asking at. What I'm asking is there somebody within this council that has got the expertise to actually know about this sort of work that we're doing? And if not, will we be going out and doing due diligence on this to ensure that we're within the right requirement?
So Lee wants to come in.
Lee,
Yeah,
sorry,
Councillor,
Lee.
so typically what we would do is report this back to our environmental health team who would be looking at these types of conditions. If they were for any reason unable to do that, then we would have to go externally to get the specialist advice that we need. But certainly that would include liaising with the fire service actually.
There is a sort of supplementary to that, in the planning conditions have to be related to planning. So if it goes significantly into risk management, then that's where it becomes a little bit more nebulous as a pure planning matter.
Yeah, so I think what Councillor Watson is saying, and I agree with it, is that if we was to approve this evening, obviously it gets looked at under a safety review, and if any concerns are found in that safety review, then, so let's just say it was found out that actually the technology is not that safe, then obviously it will be picked up by them.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. All right. Okay, I've got no further questions. Any further questions there? No? Okay. I think that then takes us into debate. Would anyone like to start this evening? Is it particular right? No? Okay. All right then, so I'll get started. So look, it's not something I'm massively happy about. Obviously we're losing a large part of the fens. Obviously we do need this sort of renewable technology. Obviously we've seen certainly over the last week with the gas shortage, and how reliant we are on other countries, and how far behind we are on producing electricity. So in that sense, I don't think there's too many reasons for refusal on the basis of how important it is. In terms of the safety, I am still nervous about what we're looking at in this report. However, we have been assured by the officers this evening that obviously this is going to be extensively looked at in the future, and if any problems are found with this relatively new technology, then it'll be addressed at that stage. And of course, it's right and important that the fire brigade have been made aware of that. So yeah, in a sense, it's a funny one. I'm probably looking to approve. I don't think it's fantastic, but it's one of those difficult decisions that I think we have to make on planning. And I've got nothing else to add there. Does anyone else have anything else that they wanted to add? No? Okay. All right, and I think also if we was to go down the road of refusal on appeal, given how desperate the situation is in Westminster for renewable sources of energy, I'm not sure it had much legs to stand on a refusal, and on that basis, again, I think that's one of the other reasons I think it's probably a responsible decision to give it a green light. As long as it's monitored, I'm happy. Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Piccolo.
Thank you. Chair, you were saying it's an idea, fantastic. What would you need to see in this application to enable you to say, yeah, this is fine, I don't have any reservations? What's it missing?
For me, at the moment, I think it's the clarification from the fire brigade that they're happy. Obviously, they're the ones who have to turn up if it's a problem. It might not be a problem, but obviously we've seen the news report that there could be potential problems. So obviously they need to be given the green light, and it's obviously the stuff is overlooked extensively.
So the chance to ask the question, we will ask you. That seems reasonable.
Councillor Piccolo and Councillor Polly.
Yeah, just on the point about safety and whatever else, I think if there was a major problem that was discovered on these type of energy supply plants, I think the government would step in and retrospectively put in some sort of safeguarding or conditioning to make sure it stays safe. I can't see how anybody could allow something that was that detrimental to the unit, to the local community, or potentially hazardous to the local community to go ahead. So, as I'm just sort of done with this size, it was big dangers, and I've suddenly discovered that the government would do, well, I hope the government would do something about it.
Okay. All right. Is there any other hands raised? Councillor Polly.
So, I feel uncomfortable with the size of this particular solar farm, and we've spoken about storage of batteries, but I've done a little bit background. I don't know that I've found anywhere where we're storing batteries on a natural floodplain on things that are designed to, and that's been a concern from the start for me, that I've always been nervous that electrics and water are not good bedfellows, and although other systems may have been tested in more urban environments, and I still struggle with the scale, and although the officer was advised that there has been a report on the 49.9 wattage that we all queried at the beginning, because although this application is predominantly in Thurrock, there is part of it that borders onto, and we weren't looking at it in a whole, and I did have a nervousness at that time that where we just chancing our arm coming on just below the threshold to make it acceptable, rather than going to the Secretary of State. So I've noticed I wasn't able to attend the site visit, but there's nothing that I've read in the report that has really changed my mind from the first hearing of this application. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, all right, thank you. Was there any other hands raised? Anyone else have anything to say? No, okay, all right then, so, yeah, some really good points raised. I think that we've done the right thing to go out there. There's absolutely no doubt that it will have some impact on the landscape out there in Malvern. But it's, again, it's a difficult decision. It's not easy. Obviously, we're dealing with this type of technology going forward. So with that, I think that we've done the best we can in planning terms. There is obviously a recommendation set out on page 29, that's 6.0. Did anyone want to recommend approval? Councillor Lydiard, is that seconded? Councillor Piccolo. Okay, so it's now page 29. So we're granting planning permission there, that's 6.0, and that's a recommendation for approval. All those in favour, please raise your hands. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hands raised. Okay. All those against?
There's only 8 of us. That's the first time. 5 and 5.
4, really thanks.
Yeah. 5-4, yeah.
5-2.
5-2.
Yeah. With, no.
Right, I'll tell you what.
Councillor Fletcher and
Let's do this again. I saw 2 hands raised there. 5-5, right?
Can't vote.
Councillor Lydiard.
My hand doesn't move.
James' hands don't move. Councillor Lydiard's approving. Your seconded, Councillor Piccolo. All those in favour, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3. 4. Right.
Yeah.
There was definitely 5 raised in the first vote. Right, so there's 4. All those against? 3.
3.
No,
1 hand each.
Okay then, so with that, we can say, Grace, you happy with that, yeah? 4, 3?
4 is bringing in the
Yeah.
4-3.
Okay, so agenda item 8, land changes to Penryn, Judge Farm has been approved. All right, thank you everyone for your involvement in that one. All right, which takes us to Town Centre Car Park, agenda item 9, 20/0064/FUL. Thank you.
Good evening, members. Hope you can all hear me. Sorry, I'm full cold. I'm that person who's got a cold at the moment, but not COVID. As you'll be aware, the site lies in the heart of Stamford Hope Town Centre and is bounded by King Street, the High Street and Church Hill. The site comprises of the Town Centre car park, which is accessed via the High Street to the east. Excellent, the mouse moves, brilliant. And King Street to the north. The site is occupied by a derelict commercial premises on the corner of King Street and the High Street. The Town Centre car park provides 107 parking spaces. The topography of the site is such that the ground slopes up towards the junction with the High Street, up to the junction of the High Street, and south of the site by 2 listed buildings, St Paul's Church and the Inn on the Green.
There's a cross on the top right.
Members may well remember that this application was last before the committee in February 2019, when a larger, more dense scheme was proposed and refused. That previous application was dismissed as appeal in January this year. This very recent appeal decision is most relevant to the consideration of this planning application this evening. The appealed application was refused for 2 reasons: the loss of public parking, the loss of which was considered to undermine the vitality of the town centre, and the scale and mass of the previous proposal was considered to be out of keeping with the town centre. In dismissing the appeal, the inspector rejected the application for 2 reasons. Firstly, the visual impact of the blank podium wall along the boundary of the King Street High Street junction, here. And secondly, the layout of the previous scheme showed that 3/5 of the proposed flats would have had single aspect windows and be likely to not receive sufficient light. Critically, the inspector commented in their decision that The proposal would provide a public benefit, result in a less than substantial harm to the nearby listed buildings, but would be harmful to the future occupants and appearance of the area. The appeal was not dismissed for the council's 2 reasons for refusal. This current scheme proposes a reduced number of units, providing 32 flats, 26 2-bed and 6 1-bed, of which 11 would be affordable units. 3 commercial units would be provided on the ground floor, along with the majority of the parking provision for the flats. Notably, there would be no residential accommodation to the ground floor, and the area of concern relating to design, which was raised by the inspector, the podium wall, has been designed out of this scheme, and it would be replaced with a 3rd commercial unit with more glazing than previously provided, which will be seen in the later elevations. As well as balconies for the majority of the flats, the 1st floor would provide an amenity deck area to the rear. This slide shows the proposed 2nd floor layout, and the 3rd floor layout shows the amenity area to the western end of the building. The 4th floor layout shows the flats proposed to the corner of the High Street and King Street junction, which is where you would expect and anticipate the highest part of the building to be. And there's a roof plan of the proposal. Turning to the elevations, here are the elevations of the front of the building facing King Street in the top of the picture, the High Street elevation in the centre, and the rear elevation at the bottom of the screen there. Some further elevations of the flanks of the proposed building, and more detailed elevations of the proposal from King Street and from the High Street. The proposal seeks to provide 32 parking spaces, equating to 1 space per flat, including 2 disabled spaces and 3 visitor spaces in the light green here. 3 spaces are provided for the use of the commercial units, they're shown in lilac, and 15 spaces provided for long-term season ticket holder parking provision, shown in light blue. Within the application site, 2 further disabled accessible parking spaces are provided for the town centre car park there in red. And the remainder of the wider town centre car park would continue to provide parking, with a total provision of 42 parking spaces remaining for the public car park. The applicant has agreed to enter into a Section 106 legal agreement to secure the provision of the 42 spaces as a short-term car park for shoppers. Pricing policy would be fixed so as to prevent long-term parking and ensure short-term parking is available for shoppers and those using the town centre. The next few slides are some photos of the site and the immediate area. So there's views of the site from King Street and views from within the car park. Including the access from the High Street and King Street. And some views of the site to the east and the eastern boundary. And some views of the surrounding street scene. Here's a view of what the site could look like when viewed from the Manor roundabout, and you can see there the proposal there in the distance in comparison to the surrounding development. The applicant has also provided some computer images of what the site could look like with the development built out. So there's views from the north. So you've got King Street here and the High Street, the end here. The view along King Street. The view from the pedestrian crossing on King Street looking through with St Margaret's Church in the background. The view from King Street looking up the public right-of-way. Looking north along King Street. View of the rear of the site with the amenity area I spoke about earlier, and the view from the car park. and views from the southeast. To summarise, the proposal would involve the redevelopment of a town centre site for both commercial and residential uses. The proposal would not conflict with the land use policy for the town centre, and as residential development is proposed, the tilted balance in favour of granting development is engaged, as detailed earlier in the report. With respect to the two nearby listed buildings, the impacts of the proposals upon St Margaret's and the Inn on the Green have been fully considered by the council, and less than substantial harm would result. While it is noted and acknowledged that residents have written in objecting to, in response to the proposals, including several petitions against the development, these petitions were received prior to the submission of these most current revised proposals, but they are detailed nonetheless within the report for members. All impacts associated with amenity, heritage, landscape and ecology and highway matters excuse me, have been fully considered, and the proposals have been found to be acceptable. The development would lead to the regeneration of this town centre site, providing the 3 commercial units and 32 flats, contributing to the 5-year housing supply. A policy compliant level of affordable housing would also be provided in this town centre location. The planning inspectorate considered the scale and mass of the previous development to be acceptable, and given the similarity in the height of the current scheme, the design, scale, mass and appearance of the proposal would be considered acceptable, and the development would provide suitable amenity environments for future occupiers. The proposal would result in the loss of some town centre parking spaces. However, the very recent appeal decision determined that the loss of those public spaces would not harm the vitality and viability of the town centre. Consequently, there would be no likelihood of sustaining an appeal should the application be refused on the basis of the loss of car parking spaces for this reduced scheme. The current application has overcome the concerns raised by the Planning Inspectorate, and the application is now considered to be acceptable. There is a recommendation to approve the application subject to conditions and the applicant entering into a 106 legal agreement as set out on page 113 for members. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. Okay then, so that leads us to questions.
Thanks, Nadia. On page 91, it says the GP practices do not have the capacity for the additional growth resulting from this development. So a development contribution of 12.5 grand. What that 12.5 grand buy?
In all honesty, we haven't been provided the detail of what that would provide, but I would imagine, because in most applications, we would normally only hear from the NHS with regards to the impact on infrastructure with services of schemes of 50 or more. So it is unusual to have an application come back to us, or consultee come back and say for 32 units, we would seek a contribution. I think because they were probably consulted on the previous application, they've come back on this. They have their own formula for working out what contribution would be appropriate. I would imagine it would be to help provide with the resources they would need within each individual GP practice to provide that additional capacity that the 32 flats would result in terms of actual resource, whether that's actual hardware, software or staffing. But it isn't a huge amount.
No,
I
certainly
take the
rather.
point. Yeah.
I appreciate the fact it's not your formula.
Yeah.
But the NHS have said they don't have, the local practices don't have the capacity for the growth. I was the account member health for 4 years. If you put a 0 on the end of that figure, I can't imagine what practical it to buy. So I'm just entirely confused that for 106 mitigation for no capacity in local surgery, and 12 grand, I can't even think they would buy it demountable.
Yeah, I take
Let
your
them staff.
I take your point. The applicant is not actually obliged to necessarily even agree to that amount because it's below the threshold that we would normally ask. I put it to them because we'd heard from the NHS and they had requested this based on their own formula, and they were willing to provide that amount. I think that would be, that we would have to take that as a matter of goodwill on their behalf, that they would be willing to pay that without asking further information as to what it would be used for.
One more, Chair.
Yeah, go for it, thank you.
Under the heritage assessment, the harm caused to the Grade 1 listed church, St Margaret's, is considered less than substantial. I find that wording odd. Can you just help me understand it? Because less than substantial, from what I understand of the national policy planning framework, can still be significant harm,
Yeah.
but less than substantial. It's strange wording. It's certainly not saying that the harm to a Grade 1 listed building is insignificant, is it?
No, it's not. The heritage comments aren't saying there is no harm and that they have no objection. But I take your point that the terminology can be considered to be, can be considered to be somewhat unusual, but this is specific to heritage assessments. And it was considered within detail within both the previous application and at the appeal hearing, actually, that with respect to the harm caused to the heritage assets. And the planning inspector themselves actually agreed with the assessment that was made by our heritage guys that it was ultimately less than substantial harm. So there is some harm, but not sufficient to warrant refusing it. And indeed, I think, given the views from the High Street and from King Street, from the development to St Margaret's in particular, you can see that a heritage assessor couldn't say there would be no harm, because there is a visual impact for sure, but it is less than substantial, so there is less than significant harm, so we couldn't justify refusing it on that basis at all. So it's that notch down.
Okay, any further questions there? Councillor Piccolo.
Yeah, just perhaps you can answer this question. Why is the public car park not included in part of the plan, but actually part of the 106 agreement, which I understand could be altered without proof, without feedback to the planning committee? So 106 agreements, I believe, whilst they may be agreed at the planning committee, I believe that sometimes they are altered after they've been agreed with the planning committee. Obviously, the number of affordable housing springs to mind. And that never comes back to the planning committee. So can you clarify, could any agreements made under the 106 agreement be altered in the future without coming back to this committee? And could there be any other reason why the car parking wasn't included in the main application? Because they're depending on the car park to support their application, and yet they're not prepared, seems to me, to put it as part of the main application. I don't know whether you could just clarify that.
Yeah, I can answer both points. So with respect to your first question about the extent of the red line in relation to not including all of the public car park, that's entirely within the applicant's gift to define the extent of the application site. And to my mind, I was at the last committee when this application site was considered. And I would imagine it would have been because of the planning history of the site, the fact that the 2018 application had the same red line boundary and we had an ongoing appeal. It would make sense for an applicant to have a red line showing the same boundary from a planning point of view, because that's what's being considered relevant to the planning application. Turning to your point about the 106 agreement, discussions have been held with the applicant about entering into a Section 106 bilateral agreement, an agreement between both the council and the applicant about securing the use of the car park. We've been clear to the applicant that's what we would want. If members choose tonight to grant planning permission subject to that bilateral Section 106 agreement, any changes to that could be brought back to members to consider, because you are granting permission subject to an agreement that's before you tonight. Any changes to that we could come back and ask your views on and your consent to.
Okay.
Just I've not come across before where 106, part of the 106 agreement has been brought back to the planning committee. Maybe wrong, but I can't remember.
It doesn't happen often, but it has happened before in the past. We have come back before and said, well, actually, members granted planning permission on this basis. If someone is now wanting to change the terms of that 106, and as you say, it's most commonly with affordable housing provision, we'll bring it back to you and say, well, look, they wanted that we granted permission, and you agreed with that to 35% affordable housing. They now want to come in for 10 or 15%. That's in your gift, whether you agree that or not. So it has happened, and we could do that.
So it would automatically come back to the planning committee if they wanted to change any of the things that were agreed under the.
Yes, indeed, if there is a reduction in that and change in that, we would bring it back to you, because that's not what you agreed. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Howden.
So just going on Councillor Piccolo's point, so say hypothetically committee passed the application predicated on the 106 agreement, and then the 106 agreement, there was an attempt to vary it, to do something the committee didn't want. If we were then to turn it down, and they were then to go to appeal, would it not be likely that the planning inspectorate would say, no, the council have passed it on material grounds, but just not with the 106? Would it be more likely that their appeal would be successful on the basis that the planning committee have already passed it once, minus what the inspector could view as a minor codicil?
It depends. I understand the point you're getting to, and the recommendation on page 113 is a two-part recommendation. But recommendation B lists the heads of terms of the section 106 agreement, which I say is a bilateral between both us and the applicant. If the applicant, say, just for argument's sake, looked to not provide any affordable housing and said, actually, we don't want to, but there is no viability in the scheme, we want to come back and not provide any, we would absolutely have to bring that back to you, and it's within your gift as the committee to refuse the application on that basis and say, no, we would not grant planning permission. The planning inspectorate would still have to consider just that item, whether there are material issues that might make it acceptable as one matter, but it would come down to that one issue then why you turned it down, whether that's parking or affordable housing, or whichever the matter is looking to be varied. It comes down to those specifics. Whether an inspector would give more weight to the fact that in principle you've agreed it, it comes down to how material those concerns are that are being altered. And you know, let's be clear, the application is only acceptable because of the 106 agreement heads of terms. If those matters weren't there, we wouldn't be recommending approval now, because we want that agreement. It's important.
All right, okay, no further questions. All right then, so we do have speaker statements on Town Centre car park this evening. The first is a statement of objection from Shane Head, who's the ward councillor. Shane, if you'd like, actually where you are, if you'd like to present your report, present your statements as loud as you can, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee, for hearing me. It doesn't matter how many times a variant of this application comes forward, I really can't say this in a different way. When the land was sold wrongly, the collective planning application did include 101 free car parking spaces for 3 hours. And yet this application, again, knowingly, seems to fail to honour the spirit of what the site was sold for to the developer. The original obligation is documented in the minutes of the Council's Cabinet meeting on the 10th of April 2013. And I quote, "The scheme has received planning consent, maintains the same number of shoppers' parking spaces, and if I regard it is to be a condition of the sale that these are maintained as free to shoppers as currently in place." The land registry document dated the 6th of December 2013 says the same. Disappointingly, the developer appears to knowingly not be honouring that spirit here, although I do live in hope that the pricing policy honours 3 hours of free car parking. 100 plus free car parking spaces that are time limited is a red line not just for us, but for shop owners and residents. The application also fails material tests such as CSTP 22 and 23, density, concern over amenity issues and viability of the Centuries Old Town Centre. The application density remains a concern for those who live in the development, as well as being compacted close to shops and homes already there. The subsequent loss of amenity is easy to visualise, with concerns over lighting and overlooking and noise invasion to neighbours being obvious. I'm afraid that those who do not live there or here cannot make an assessment of the material impacts as well as those that do. Stamford is less than a 2-minute drive away from Corringham, which has 353 car parking spaces. This application, if passed, will make Stamford less viable, as shoppers can easily migrate elsewhere. It plans to reduce car parking and continuing to charge for those spaces are allowed. To actually make more Stamford more viable, we actually need more free car parking in the way that was promised, because we more short stay shoppers from Stamford, Horndon, Orsett and Bournemouth. The other issue is what stops the applicant and owner from deciding to build another building on the rest of their land, eliminating what residual car parking we have left forever. The design of the character with the existing town centre would create an overly dense street scene on the entrance to the town, and the physical density for those who may end up living there remains a concern. A historic view of a millennia-aged church would also be lost. We would have more high-rises in Stamford Hope in that small area than anywhere else in East Thurrock. Whilst an outside body has said it doesn't feel strongly about it, respectfully, that is their opinion, it is not mine. I have no doubt the proposal is profitable for the developer. I get the attraction for them, but what I don't see is the promised regeneration for us. To conclude, no one is saying that this area wouldn't benefit from being regenerated, but this application is not the answer to the puzzle. I urge the committee to reject the application, ask the developer to go back to the drawing board, base a decision on the spirit of how the land was sold, and come forward with a development which positively integrates and complements Stamford Hope Town. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Head, for your statement there. Grace, have we got a contact with, is it Danny?
Danny Simmons. Yeah.
Danny, if you could hear us, if you could present your statement, please, and if I could have silence in the room, that'd be great. Thank you. Speak as loud as you can, please, Danny. Thank you.
Yeah. Good evening, committee. Hopefully you can see and hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah. My name is Danny Simmons. I'm from RPS. I'm a planning consultant and I'm the agent acting on behalf of the applicant. And accordingly, I'm speaking in support of the application. The redevelopment proposals on this site were considered by your committee back in February 2019, following which the proposals were considered at appeal. There have been some significant changes to the proposals, which are subject of this latest application. First, to emphasise, the appeal inspector supported the principle of the proposals and reached a number of important conclusions, namely that the proposed building would be a bold and substantial modern change, breathing new life into the townscape and contributing to the vitality and viability of Stamford-le-Hope Town Centre. Importantly, the inspector concluded that the proposal would ensure the existence of the short stay car park and that the number of proposed spaces was sufficient to meet need. And with respect, the appeal inspector's conclusions are highly material to your decision this evening. But whilst the appeal inspector supported the scale and nature of the proposals, he did dismiss the appeal for two reasons. As explained by your planning officer, concern about daylight single aspect flats and the street level podium wall. On the first point, the inspector's view was influenced by the fact that no daylight analysis was undertaken. However, a daylight and sunlight report has been submitted with this application. On both points, the scheme has been amended accordingly. Indeed, your officers have thoroughly appraised the proposals and agree that all relevant matters have been resolved as recognised by their recommendation. In addition, you should be aware of the following. The applicant is committed to 35% compliant affordable housing plus contributions towards education, health and highways matters, and unlike many, is not seeking a reduction based on viability grounds. Secondly, compared to the appeal scheme, the proposals now allow for an additional 15 town centre spaces for longer term use, for example for shopkeepers, in addition of course to the 42 public short-term spaces. So committee, accordingly, I trust that you will agree that as well as complying with policy, the proposals will bring forward much needed housing, new commercial units, secure regeneration and enhance the viability and vitality of Stamford-le-Hope Town Centre. Committee, finally, just in response to the previous speaker who raised the issue of the land deal and the fact that the site should include a 100 space car park. Some of you may recall that the council had clear legal advice on this matter back in January 2019, where it was explained that the sale of land is not a material planning consideration. In any event, the agreement to which the previous objector refers related to a completely different scheme, which included a supermarket. Committee, thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you very much for that statement. Okay, so that's our statements complete for this item. That now will do remaining questions. Now, has anything come up from those statements? Any further questions? Councillor Piccolo?
Yeah, it was part of that whole presentation. It's just that on the 106 agreement regarding the pricing for the car park, it's not been worked out, it's not been determined yet. Would it be possible to get how much sway have we got to get 3 hours free parking, part of that agreement in the 106 agreement? And if we couldn't get that, because as going back to Councillor Head's presentation, the spirit of the sale at the time that went through was that there would be free parking for the shoppers. We've got corridors, again, as Councillor Head said, 2 minutes up the road, and that's there's more than 300 parking spaces, free parking spaces in Corridor Centre. If you drive around Stanford Road now, the roads are blocked, they're parked all on double yellow lines because they won't go into the car park. So, anyway, getting back, so could we get, would it be possible that part of the 106 agreement could say that 3 hours of it was going to be free parking? If that isn't the case, and we do agree something on price at the price, could they at some later stage come back and say, or would it be then able for them to increase the pricing as they so wish? And could they increase it to such an extent that nobody uses it, so they could then use that as an excuse to come back to planning and say no one's using the car park, so we want to build on it?
Yes, please.
Sorry, can I just add a quick question in, Chair, because I think it'd be relevant.
Relevant to that,
Yeah,
relevant, yeah, thank you.
And absolutely get what Councillor Piccolo is saying. If there was a thought within the developer that they might want to change the charging and not allow the free to the future, that they consult with the shop owners along in that area to see if they might want to, as some of the shops at Coleman do, make a contribution to those parkings before, rather than just increase charges or stop the free parking, to actually, discuss it with their neighbours to see if the shops might want to mock up that 3 hours free parking if it was.
To ask for their inputs, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, to give them the option, because yeah. I think I may be correct in that some of the shops at Coleman Town Centre, there's one of the car parks at the back where the actual shop owners within their lease agreements have to pay a contribution towards that car park being maintained up to and keep it free for the. So I'm just wondering, rather than. So I just wondered if that would be an option.
I understand.
I mean, ideally we want to keep it free. We want to keep it free for 3 hours, but that in the thinking.
Yeah.
That the shopkeepers.
If I could just give some clarification on that point about the parking that's paid for by the shopkeepers in Corringham.
Yeah.
It's only paid for by the shops that back onto that car park, not the whole of all the shops in Corringham. So technically, you would be asking just the 3 new shops. If you was to use Corringham as an example, because it's not elsewhere, you would potentially be asking just those 3 shops to contribute towards the parking if you was to use the Corringham example as a criteria for doing so.
I think they could explain it out if the high street is a slightly different layout. I wasn't being specific with that.
I was going to say, Chair, just quickly, that I live in Stanford, I hope myself, and the shops on the high street actually back onto that car park as well. You gain access to the shops on the high street via that car park. All the parking underneath the shops on the high street, you have to come down the car park entrance to get into. And in fact, at the top end, their entrance is in the car, is actually in the car park to the back of their property. It's right in the top corner.
Nadia, did you want to pick up?
Yeah, thank you. I absolutely understand and respect the point that both councillors are making here, actually. And Julian and I have spoken about this over the last few days. The land is privately owned. It is a privately owned site, but there is a public car park, and the applicant is willing to enter into an agreement to ensure that there is short-term parking secured. And it is about, as on page 114 in the heads of terms, it is about having a secured parking scheme to retain that, certainly a fixed system for at least 3 hours stay and no return. So it ensures there is a short-term car park for shoppers to make sure people can come and go and do what they need to do. The details of that pricing system, or whether we could have a charge, say for example, happening after the 4th hour. So at that point it's free for the first 3 hours. That could be discussed and negotiated with the applicant, and I'm sure something can be done, because ultimately we want to ensure that those 42 spaces that remain would be accessible and available for short-term parking. We don't want to lose them to long-term parking for people travelling or commuting. That's not the aim of it.
Councillor Fletcher, was your hand raised?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. In relation to those 42 spaces, we were talking about one parking space per flat in the development itself. How confident are we that those 42 car parking spaces will actually be free when the almost inevitable second car in each flat has to go somewhere?
They would have to be, well, the parking spaces for the residential development would all be designated, firstly, and secondly, anything else that's outside of the red line, they wouldn't have the ability to park there. But your point regarding the securing of the short-term spaces, that would still have to be secured within the 106, and that would have to be a bilateral agreement between us and the applicant.
So we would actually bar the residents of those new flats from using.
Well, it would be a public car park, so they would be taking a risk, as I would if I was to park there and not secure that space, either by a free payment ticket or a ticket that I've paid £1 for.
I'll just, the car park at the moment is counting cameras, and there is a charge of £1 per hour at the moment. So I suspect that the reason for the cameras being put in there is so that obviously they can enforce the parking spaces just by in and out of the car park. So there's a camera when you go in, the camera when you go out. Obviously, as a resident, there's nothing stopping you there, but as Nadia said, if we brought in some sort of charging policy that was you park free for the first hour, and then any maximum stays a certain period, so you can only stay there for a maximum period, and you charge a fee for each hour after that, then that would potentially prevent people from parking a long stay, because obviously they would then get a penalty ticket for parking in the car park.
So the net result, presumably, is that the almost inevitable extra cars that are not catered for in the residential site would have to find some other part of the standard road to park.
But you're in a residence parking area, and I think one of the conditions is that the applicants can't apply for a residence parking permit.
It is, and it's back bang in the town centre.
So the point I'm making is, cars got to go somewhere. If you're lucky, every person who lives in these flats has one car. Luckier than most parts of the development. If you're not lucky, you're creating a further demand on parking somewhere on South Road. Because the damn things you've got over the summer, they're not going to get parked on the street.
I think we've had this debate before. We can't be in a position where we're providing, 2 car parking spaces for every property, particularly when things like the census are telling us that the car ownership in for flats is less than 1 per property overall as an average.
Where? Maybe.
I don't know. Wherever they ask the questions of people in the census. But the situation is, it is a town centre location, it's right by bus stops.
Yeah.
There's a, 20-minute bus service, it's literally 5 minutes from the station. You know, in terms of public accessibility, it's acceptable in one space per property.
My question, just to be clear, my question purely speaks to how realistic it is to assume that a development like this, with one parking space per flat, is going to actually solve rather than create parking problems. You invite people in to live in, it's going to hopefully also invite their vehicles and live in there.
They have, but ultimately, it's a transport policy. We're trying to get people out of their cars and in other things. You look at the debate at the moment about the gas and whatever it is, the CO2 emissions. Ultimately, people are. You look at the latest cycle. We can't put cycle criteria unless we get cars off the road in Thurrock because it's that busy. Yeah. So we've got to look at
this one. Deal with that. That's a bigger question. And in the meantime. Any of the streets.
We've got to start somewhere.
Well, what we'll do, I mean, we do have our parking stand coming up at transport regeneration, so we can really get into that. That's what's killing us at the moment, is the parking stands. But we can get to the bottom of that. I've got 3 hands up. I'll go to Councillor Piccolo, then Councillor Yard, then Councillor Polly. Councillor Piccolo.
Yeah, just quickly. Obviously, it's been answered that in the 106 agreement, or part of the conditions was that they won't be able to apply for parking permits for their cars. Will they be able to apply for visitor parking permits?
3 visitor spaces are proposed within the scheme.
No, but could they apply in their house, from that house?
There are no residence parking spaces in the town centre area.
No, I know, but.
No, the answer is no, they can't apply for the residence parking scheme.
They can't apply for a visitor's parking permit.
I'm not sure what the actual.
Well, that needs to be clarified, because otherwise, less than a 2 minutes walk from the town centre. In actual fact, less than 100 yards from the town centre, there's residence parking scheme, and if they can apply for a permit for a visitor's permit, then they can have a second car and just put a visitor's permit in it because it's far cheaper.
They're only valid for 5 hours.
No, but they can put it out for 2. They're costing, I think it's 60p, so it costs them £1.20. So it's cheaper for them to buy a visitor's parking permit and write it out for twice and use it every day, and just park their car 100 yards away and not park in the car park. In actual fact, it'd probably be safe. It could be deemed that it would be safer parked in a residential street rather than in the car park.
I'm not sure how the system works, but if you go on the system and you're not within the residence parking scheme, you can't ask for anything as far as I'm aware. Visitor permit or permit. If you're not valid for the residence parking scheme, you can't ask for anything.
But in addition to that, I understand the point you're making, Councillor Piccolo. Somebody could try to do that, but the reality would be that someone would have to be particularly tenacious and determined to buy multiple visitor permits or to secure them for their second car every day, 24 hours around the clock, to enable them to park a car just outside of that area, and that's unlikely in reality. And we are talking about a town centre location that's 250 metres away from the train station, where there are also the public transport options. If we were talking about somewhere on the edge of the town, where there would be a real likelihood of somebody needing that second car to access the site and get to amenities, then I could understand that point further. But here we can't have more of a central location, and they're providing sufficient parking that the planning inspector very recently considered to be acceptable. So I think we're on to a bit of a sticky wicket here in objecting to this proposal on the basis of those parking concerns, when we've said we'll try and tighten this up as much as we possibly can within the bilateral agreement to secure that parking provision for shoppers.
One hurdle you've got to get over is So we've had the planning inspector look at this and he says it's acceptable, he or she says it's acceptable. Throughout the situations, I know it's not acceptable, you know it's not acceptable, we know this is going to be a problem, but unfortunately planning are constrained by appeal inspectors and standards. One of the other things off the top of my head, so we had an issue with Bellway at the bottom of Devonshire Road, big housing estate, and that's three visit spaces, probably similar, in fact more. Apparently it's a war zone, trying to park the car there. Not only is it a war zone, but you can't even park within the vicinity because there are yellow lines everywhere. So I'm trying, off the top of my head, if I have a friend who lived in one of these flats, right, there's 2 visit spaces, well, they're probably going to be taken. So then I've got an option, haven't I? I can park in the high street for a few hours, just pay a couple of quid, visit my friend for a few hours and then fly off. But then again, that's then going to have a detrimental effect on the shops because I'm not actually visiting the shops. So it's a problem, but we're constrained and we'll get into it in debate. Choosing to check one.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the actual wording is a property development being not eligible for inclusion in the residence parking scheme. So it doesn't say for a residence parking permit, it's in the whole scheme. So that means visitors vouchers or permit.
So what?
It says
Informative 2 on page
2, page
122.
122.
Carry on.
Right, 2 more questions and I think we'll move on. Councillor Lydia and Councillor Polly.
Just ask how many car parking spaces are there down by the station? I know that's pretty much a few 5 minutes walk, is it?
It's about 70.
70?
Yeah, but they're paid for parking spaces and they are cameraed as that other car parking. And from my recollection, it's something like about £5 or £6 a day, might be more.
And bearing in mind that the last application wasn't dismissed on parking, this also wouldn't be dismissed.
Well, I think the likelihood of upholding a refusal on parking or highway grounds is virtually nil.
Okay, thanks for that.
Given more.
Yeah, and the other point on that is not only is it next to nil, we're aware of it at this stage. So if they go to appeal, they could use it against us for costs because in front of the appeal inspector, which better turn around and go, they knew about it when they rejected it. And the appeal inspector would go, you're right. It's not like if this was the first time, you might be able to get away with it based on opinion, but not when it's really in the court. But we'll get to that as well.
And it's a particularly recent decision at the end of January, not a year ago or 18 months ago. That's relevant.
And that could be six figures cost?
Well, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is there's a cost associated with it. We'll certainly be for. We'll go to Julian, then Councillor Polly, then Ackenbourn, and we'll get to the debate.
I was just going to say, I actually sat on that appeal as the highways engineer and obviously put forward all these concerns regarding parking spaces, charging and whatever it is. And obviously the parking inspector considered that they weren't a reason for refusal.
Councillor Polly, then Councillor Ackenbourn, and then get to the debate.
Sorry, it's a very brief question because I was an elected member in 2019 when the first application came forward. The applicant on this application, are they the same applicant that purchased the land initially in 2013? Do we know? Did they buy it knowing that the council put that caveat on it? Is that something that we know?
It's the same applicant and the same landowner. I don't know if it's the same landowner who purchased it originally.
Okay.
I would need to check that for you.
Thank you.
But it's the same, it's been a consistent applicant.
So they've been aware of it through previous. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Ackenbourn.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask a quick question. Among these parking spaces, how many did they allocate for disabled badge holders? And out of those 3 hours, if a disabled badge holder park in any of the parking space, do they have to pay after 3 hours?
With respect to your first question about the number of disabled accessible spaces, two are provided within the scheme for the use of the residential units, and 2 in red on the red plan on the back of your plans pack are car parking spaces for the car park that falls within the red line, but the applicant's providing those for the actual town centre car park use, so those two there. With regards to the pricing regime for disabled, my understanding is that I didn't believe that disabled parking spaces had to be paid for, but this is a private car park and I'm not aware of those details.
Well, the situation on disabled car parking spaces, it depends in which authority you are. Some authorities do actually charge for parking in disabled spaces over a certain period of time, potentially. I think that was something we'd have to be open to discussion with the applicant themselves. I would suggest that they perhaps make it free. The only difficulty you obviously have is that potentially a long-stay parker could park in there all day with a disabled badge. So, you know, there has to be some sort of, I guess, some sort of way. If it's going to be turned out disabled, it's a disabled badge for somebody in the town centre. Then obviously it's going to depend whether it's somebody who might be one of the shopkeepers or whatever his name might want to park there all day, for instance. Or if it's somebody just visiting the shops, then it's likelihood that you probably wouldn't want somebody to park there and then walk down, potentially go down to the station and go into town and into London or whatever it is. So it is a bit of a difficult one to say whether it should be free all the time or should have some sort of. Most disabled bays have a limit on them, or even if you park on double yellow lines, they have a limit on how much time you park in there. So I would say there should be some sort of limit on how long it's useful.
I'm not even talking about disabled bay, because I know that if you park on the disabled bay, that means it's free for you. But what about if these disabled bays are all occupied and all those 3 hours bay, if a disabled badge holder park in any one of them, will they be paying after 3 hours, or is it going to be?
That would be up to the applicant to decide on it, to agree within the charging policy if they wanted to, whether they were, if all the disabled bays and then there's a disabled bay person parking there, it would be up to the applicant how they sort that in their charging policy. That's something that we'd have to discuss within the agreement.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I think we've got any more hands raised. Nadia, so we've actually stated the obvious, because I know it was raised in one of the speaker statements. When the site was sold, obviously there was the provision there of honouring 100 spaces, but in planning terms, there's no weight to that. So in a sense, respectfully, you might as well not have had it. Is that?
Yeah, it absolutely has no material consideration in the assessment of this current planning application at all.
All right then. Councillor Howard, a question or something? Starting to go on, you go.
Yeah, I don't have a in principle objection to regeneration on the site. I don't. But I do think this application itself, on its merits, is pretty bad. Appalling, actually. I know we can't give weight to the original decision to sell, even though the council at the time gave every impression possible that it was legally binding that 100 plus parking spaces would be provided. But I think it's just so fitting that an applicant, a landowner who doesn't want to honour that original agreement is just a figure on the screen for us this evening. Full credit to the applicants who actually bothered to turn up and address planning committee in person, opposed just being this distant figure who doesn't want to honour any of the obligations they stand for. I cottoned on to something that he said, and I think I scribbled this down verbatim. The application will be substantial, modern change. Well, looking at what the heritage advisors say, considering the harm to be less than substantial, if you've got a grade 1 listed church, building about 3 times older than the United States of America, to say that you're going to have, in his own words, a substantial modern change to the area, I simply don't see how we come to the conclusion that it qualifies as less than substantial harm. Of course it's substantial harm. I think that's quite clear. In terms of the viability of the town, we've spoken a lot about parking. Let's talk about actuality. it is more convenient for me when I leave here this evening, or if I'm driving home from work, to stop at the M&S or the A13 than it is for me to stop in the town, because it is just far more convenient for me to park. If I'm going to do, I live at the bottom of Wolf Road, if I'm going to do a significant shop, I'm quite delicate, bless me, it is easier for me to drive to Corringham than it is for me to attempt to park in Stanford. So the viability of the town centre is a material planning consideration, because planning applications have got to bear in mind the harm they do to the local area. I've already spoken about the 106 agreement. The NHS are saying in their own words, and again quote, the GP practices do not have the capacity for the additional growth resulting from this development. That is what they're saying. 12.5 grand in 106 contribution is not going to touch the sides. I spent 4 years as the Cabinet Member for Health when I had a budget that was measured at the high 7 figures. And it was hard enough to build medical centres then. So that's just a laughable contribution. And the one last point I wanted to make, and I know this is going to come up plenty of times in debate, this whole issue of losing on appeal. The spectre of losing on appeal comes up on every single application that comes to the planning committee. Every single one. Yeah, if we can't assign weight to object to an application on the basis of the terms of the sale, then nor should you be able to assign weight to the threat of losing at appeal. That can't be a material reason. After all, if it was, we could save the borough a few £100,000 by having far less planning officers and not having planning committee meetings, just accepting everything that's going to go through on appeal. So I really don't see how we can look at an application that has been rejected before, the rejection has been upheld by the inspector, and then give any weight whatsoever to the idea that, oh, we're going to lose on appeal. That's always a risk that we run, but we have to make a determination based on what do we think is right for the community, and then we fight the appeal on the merits there and then. I haven't heard any arguments that would say this is a positive for the community in terms of the parking, in terms of the impact on the town centre, and in terms of the pretty lightweight mitigation that is offered. So on that basis, I'm not seeing positives. So that's what I'm currently thinking. Thanks, Jim.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Howden. Who's next? Councillor Pigon?
Just going back to the slide presentation, the picture shown of the proposed development, the graphics, quite often they'll come across as superimposed over the townscape as it is at present. I've just got a feeling the reason that wasn't the case was because the angles they were viewed at actually didn't make it look that imposing. In actual fact, when you were looking down, it looked like it wasn't much higher than the shops that were down the road, but in actual fact it isn't. It's at least 2 stories high. So I'm a bit disappointed with that, and I think the photographs were actually misleading. I think it actually made the building look smaller than it physically would be. It didn't look that imposing because it made it look to scale with the shops that are in existence. So I'm not happy with that. So I don't think, and I don't know whether someone wants to get the photographs up, but I'm definitely not happy with that. Also, the views of the parking, the pictures of down King Street and whatever it was, did show that there was loads of cars parked on the yellow lines. So it shows that there is a parking problem in Stanford Town Centre. I'll just get the picture back up here. Yeah, like if you look at that picture there, the buildings on the shops on the right don't look much smaller than the scheme on the left, the way it's been designed, the way it's been built out. And again there, it looks virtually the same height.
So that is a 3-storey element. That is the lowest portion of it there.
I don't want to labour the point, but I just think that the graphics, they could have been. We've quite often seen graphics come to the planning committee where they're actually superimposed on the highway as it is seen. And I think one of the reasons they've been done like that is because it doesn't look as imposing as it would do if you see that actually placed on the townscape as it is at present.
Councillor Polly.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened with interest, obviously. I've been newly elected in May. I wasn't here for the original application, but what I did pick up from the agent that was speaking in support was they picked the bones of the appeal and did the minimum that they felt that they could get away with. There was not a report submitted with the original application for sunlight and daylight, and I think that was because the original scheme would have failed. The fact that they minimised it to just comply with the inspector's comments it just continues the vein of the contempt that I feel that the applicant is treating this authority. They purchased the land and made the application knowing the wishes of the council and the caveat that has been put on the land sale, although we appreciate you not getting into the that's not a material consideration which we say, but I still do think if they want the support of the council, then they've not worked in harmony with this authority, and I do very much listen to the local councillors and as what one of our officers said, as local resident who's quite aware of this high street and that how important it is to the local community and the economic vibrancy of Stamford, and I do have some concerns. I've not been happy with on paper. I thought we couldn't really argue against it, but listening to some of the issues that have come out in debate, I think we have got some concerns now. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Lydiards, Councillor Watson, and Councillor Bigelow.
I used to go to Stanley Hope in that sort of town centre every week. We had difficulties parking. Normally, you would sort of maybe circle the High Street, King Street once and hopefully find a parking space. And yes, it was difficult. And I do understand how local shoppers would find it difficult, but most people was just sort of popping in for a couple of items in the co-op fairly late-ish or something like that. I didn't use the parking spaces during the day. I don't know whether we've done any sort of understanding of the spare capacity during the day, but I imagine it's a lot less in the evening because there's quite a few restaurants, quite a few pubs there, and the evening, the evening parking would probably be more difficult than the daytime. So I'm really struggling which way to go.
Just to give you a reflection, it's busy all the time in the town centre. There are single yellow lines on one side, there's parking on the other side. Very rarely do you always drive down the King Street and find one of the parking spaces empty. People park on the single yellow lines because they don't see them like people park on the double yellow lines as well. You go up there on a Saturday and it's like chaos. Sometimes the bus can't actually get through because the 5 and the 5A and 5B go that way. It's a busy little town centre, and the car park itself is pretty empty because people don't want to pay £1 to park for an hour. That's a regret. From a highways point of view, I look at it all the time in terms of I always walk with my highways hat on.
You live there as well.
Yeah. I don't. This is not as a resident. I'm talking about with my highways hat on. It is a busy area. There's a lot. The parking spaces, the time parking spaces are always always, there's very rarely lots of them free. You might find one if you drive up there and drive it, but lots of time people are waiting for people to come out of spaces and whatever.
Councillor Watson.
Okay, so I'm a bit torn on this development. I quite like the actual development itself, but it raises concerns for me because I like the mix if it's done sensitively enough with modern, with like it's like village or old. I mean, you just have to look at Westminster to see the House of Parliament next to a building that was born that was done in the 1960s, and it complements itself.
What colours house?
There you go.
It's ugly.
So,
I work there, it's ugly.
oh, sorry, hold on.
Shut up.
So for me, about the parking, I think, Julian, you just like hit it. If we do this development, it looks like it's going to be like it is now. Because they don't use the car park anyway, Julian just said. They're all on the roads. So for me, it's like, now, just on that statement, that's apples and pears then, isn't it? Because you've got a bit of land, you've never used it. The bit that I worry about is the church. Because I really want it to blend with the church. I want it to blend with the character of Stanford Hall. And I don't know if that's what it's doing, but the parking is the issue for me. And I just think in the section 106 that wherever it was originally, it has been too generous by the sounds of it. But if you can sew in the, the permits and everything else that we need to do within it, I think it, for me, it will be okay over a lot of caveats, but I don't know how sympathetic it is with something the oak itself in the building.
Okay.
And I know it's not Paul Kelly's house.
No. Well, I've got a couple more hands. So I've got Councillor Piccolo again, and then Councillor Howden, and I think we should have to come to some form of sum up and votes.
Just to make it clear, and this was before I was a councillor, I was involved with a group when the very first application regarding development of this car park. And the concerns the residents had then was not with the development itself. In actual fact, it was lower, it didn't have so many flats there. But the concern the residents had then, it was for another supermarket supposedly downstairs. Now, there's already two supermarkets in Stanford Yard, the Co-op and Tesco's, and our concern then was, if we get a new third one come in, one of those quite large shops, which would be hard to lease out, would probably close. Because for such a small town like Stanford Hall, there's just not room for supermarkets. So it wasn't an objection in principle, it was an objection regarding what was being supplied. And again, secondly, when it comes back, the objections have never been in the development of the site. They've always been about the way the site was being developed. Yes, there should be flats there. Yes, there should be shops there. But there needs to be parking for shoppers. The reason that a lot of the shoppers don't go in to the King Street car park is because, yes, it's only £1. But if they're literally only going to be going into the shop for 10, 20, for 10 minutes, if that, yeah, they're not going to pay £1 to park for 10 minutes. They're going to take a chance that perhaps once a year they might get caught on a yellow line if the traffic wardens are about, and they might get a ticket. I can supply pictures of the car park. I mean, I wish I'd had some now. Where the car park is full. It might look empty because it will take 105 cars. But if you pushed all the cars that were parked in there into one space, there'd actually be more than the four cars that's been spaces that are meant to be supplied. So it is used. So I say, I think the big thing is the parking issue for me. I mean, I'm happy they've gone to 3 shops. Ideal. It's nice that they've gone around the side with some better placing on there. With a better facade around the side. I'm still not happy with the height because I think it is a bit too high, but I'm perhaps prepared to bear with that. I don't necessarily like the appearance. I perhaps disagree with the councillor. It does look a nice modern building, but I think it will look like a carbuncle on what the town centre actually is. If it was a bit further away from the town centre, it wouldn't be quite so bad. But it actually sits right next to And unless them shops are demolished, it's never going to fit in. But anyway, I was trying to make them my points. I've never been against the development in principle, and I'm happy to see it's 3 shops now. What I'm not happy about is the fact that the parking could still be a problem, and unless it can be, unless I can be assured that the 40, whatever it is, parking space, 45 parking spaces are going to be available, are going to be at a reasonable rate and maintained at that reasonable rate, I'd like to personally see them 3 for 3 hours, because that's at least that would match the spirit of the original sale, and it is still the same landowners and whatever else, and I think that's the minimum that they could do. And I didn't want to bring up the fact that they only paid £275,000 or whatever it was for land. The reason it was sold so cheap is because they were going to build 100 park. They were going to build a car park that was available for 100 cars and maintain it free for 3 hours. That's one of the reasons that the sale went through so cheap. So I think to try and mitigate the council's error, because the only reason that failed was because it was put onto the planning application rather than onto the deeds of the sale of the land. Yeah? Our legal department got it wrong. If that had been part of the sale of the land, we wouldn't be having this problem now. The problem was it was put to the planning application. The planning application died after 3 years, so that obligation was thrown out the window. Anyway, I'm not going to say any more. I've said my piece.
Councillor Howard,
Yeah, just to wind up the debate, Chair. I think we just need to consider what the benefit of committee rejecting can be. Because rejecting an application can be a very, very helpful revising tool. No members are saying that they would love to get in fact 3 members, I think Councillor Livia, Councillor Watson and I think Councillor Polly have all said that they're relatively on the fence. And I myself, Councillor Pickler said, we've got no in principle objection to regeneration in this area, but no one is saying that they're enamoured with this scheme. In fact, the closest thing one has said to being warm about this scheme is saying that they're concerned that it will go through on appeal. So I think we need to consider what is the benefit to the parking problem, what is the benefit to the impact on the Grade 1 listed church by rejecting it and forcing a revision. I reflect on the last 2 applications that have come in front of this committee for developments in my own seat. There was an application for flats on 3rd Avenue in Homesteads, and there was a input application at Windy Ridge on Brighton Avenue in Homesteads. Both those applications had been rejected by committee. I think I'm right in saying both of them have been rejected at appeal. They both came back with significant modifications and committee then passed them, and they both now have permission, they're both going to go forward. So rejecting this application is not saying that there is an in principle problem with development of this at that site. Rejecting this application is not saying the application on the whole is entirely flawed. It is saying that committee has substantial problems with a number of aspects of the application, and a rejection can force revisions. And I think that's what we need to get our heads around, that a decision here is not a permanent fait accompli. It can be used as a very, very helpful tool of revision. So I think that's why I'm minded to vote against recommendation and recommend rejection, Chair.
Okay. All right then. Has everyone, as we said, had their comments on this one? So look, clearly it's not an easy decision to make. I think ultimately when the land was sold off under that revision, I think it inevitably is only a matter of time before I think something is built. I think it was the right decision a couple of years ago to reject based on the amount of units, and obviously now they've come back, they've scaled it down as much as they can, and I think they've pretty much gone over everything that the independent inspectors asked them to. I think if you are minded to reject, you've got to be careful. I think if you're going to reject it, you need to reject it on something that's not been considered by the inspector before. And the reason I say that is because if you're going to go in for things that has been rejected before, I think sometimes the inspector will look at it and go, well, we've already been through this. And I think the only thing that's standing out is the impact on that listed building. I think that's the only material consideration that's not been overlooked by an inspector. but obviously I've not really got from anyone yet. No one here has said, oh, you know, I'm fully in favour of this. I've got a few people that are against, and I've got a few people that are sitting on the fence. Before we get to the vote, then, what from your point of view, what have you heard in the debate? What do you think?
Thank you, Chair. I think 90% of the debate has been around the pricing schedule for car parking spaces, whether this is a free car park or whether there's pricing, and that seems to be the deterrent for people parking in the existing car parking area. So, Chair, it might be an option to consider a deferral to look into the parking scheme to get some clarity around that point and to bring that back to members, because if the applicant's obviously listening online, if the applicant says, actually, I'm quite happy for that to be a free car parking space, free car park, that might go some way in addressing members' concerns. But Chair, I think you're right there. With the areas that have already gone under the microscope with the planning inspector, be cautious about revisiting those. Obviously, the impact on the listed building is to a large extent subjective, and that's reflected in the report as well. It is a matter of judgment. So there is that angle to it, but I would say we'd probably encourage, if members are minded to go down the route of refusal, would be first to explore the pricing schedule for car parking.
Okay, so based on what Lee said there, I mean, look, it is a difficult one. I think you're probably looking at three options now. You either look to approve based on this application coming back to us time and time again, it being scaled down to a point where I'm not sure how much more it can be scaled down. We either look at that deferral that Lee's raised there based on a large portion of the debate being around that aspect, or we look to refuse the application. And I think really the only one that if you're going to reject it, it's the impact on the grade A listed building. So does anyone have any comments to add to that? I mean, Councillor Pico, Councillor Howden, well, sorry, there's two hands, right? Councillor Watson, Councillor Fletcher? Councillor Watson.
So for me, on this basis, it just seems nobody has got an issue in the build itself. It's more on parking stuff, so I would be more keen to reserve and come back with what the parking would be like in that area, and whether the developer would consider 3 hours free and going forward on that. And then if that comes back, I think it could be like a debate on yes or no, really.
Councillor Fletcher?
Yeah, I agree. I think as far as rejecting is concerned, this is not about never reject something in case it goes to appeal, because I haven't been in favour of that approach for the last 2 years. I'm not about to get in favour of it now. As Councillor Hall says, if that's going to be the case, why have us? I do believe, though, that we're struggling for valid planning reasons to reject it, and even the impact on the church. We had exactly the same concern about the building opposite and its impact on Grace Church. It got us nowhere. Not seen as valid. I don't think it's one fairly better. I think, given that we have particular concerns, we know what those concerns are. Seems to me that deferring further conversations with the applicant around what they can do in parking issue sounds like a much more constructive approach. Otherwise, it's tense.
Councillor, I'll come to you, Councillor. What do you think on that? Or should you actually think it's not got no legs?
Well, just cotton on to Councillor Fletcher's analogy with tennis. Sometimes you can have a much better set if you lose the ball. But that is actually what this committee did with those 2 applications in Homesteads. Both those applications that were rejected, certainly for the case of 3rd Avenue, I believe the committee rejected it on density grounds, and when the application returned, I think I'm right in saying they came back with a more favourable chunk of 106 for flooding issues as well. It is a case that a rejection is a useful tool of revision, and I'm concerned that if we just go down, I'm not violently against the idea of deferment to try and deal with this parking issue, but I'm concerned if we just defer on parking grounds, we could easily get into a situation where, with the greatest respect in the world, we were assured when the car park was sold, we were going to get X, Y, and Z, we didn't. So I'm not overly enamoured with the idea of just trusting a legal agreement, because the last one wasn't watertight. I still don't think we would get any progress on the impact of the grade one listed building. And come back to my earlier comments, that with the NHS saying that they cannot cater for any of the new residents in this area, that 12 grand isn't going to buy anything. I can say that with a great deal of confidence. So I think there are a number of things in here that Vision on the screen, I'm sure he's listening to what we're saying. Who's hearing, we don't have any principal objection to this. So if there was any wisdom on the opposite side, they would listen to what committee is saying about the 106, about the parking, about the church, and a rejection could force a favourable reconsideration. It certainly worked the last two times you did it in my ward.
To be honest though, in response to that, the reason it worked in those two cases is because we were able to reject on planning grounds that have merit. The problem with this one, to be a bit nervous about it, this ain't that. This situation, as Chair's already pointed out, not only do we not have valid ground, but it's already been tested. We pretty well know if this went back again, if we rejected it, went back again, we know the outcome. We're looking at the car crash before it happens. In normal circumstances, I would agree with you. And certainly, for me, something like infrastructure, lack of infrastructure, should be a valid reason to knock a plan back. Amazing how often though we sit here and it isn't. All I would say about objection is in this case, I think rather than forcing the applicant back to the table, it's more likely to force us down the wrong way towards the That's the point we need to.
I do understand your point. I'm not necessarily sure that we do understand exactly what's going to happen, because the art of planning is a subjective judgment call. If it wasn't, then the application would simply go in, an officer would mark it for refusal, for rejection, and it would all be done under delegated powers. So I don't think we do know precisely what would happen with the rejection, because if we did know that, again, we couldn't actually have the requirement for a planning committee. We would just have an overview scrutiny that every 6 months just
this is
did
the
a quick
exception.
mark of
this is the
director's homework.
I mean, I've been the person sitting in that chair, having those views 2 years now, getting on for into my third year doing it. And it is a case of picking your battles. And there is, for me, there's every reason why a planning committee can sit and talk about what we've talked about tonight. We should do. If we're not going to, nobody. But when it comes to making the decision, and if we're talking about reject versus defer, all I'd say, the reason why I would vote for defer is simply that if you're going to reject something knowing, and this isn't assuming, knowing from its previous transit where the appeal decision sat, what are you doing with it? Personally, I think it's less likely we would get that to do what we want them to do, and more likely we will just end up with it. And that way we've got no way back. At least with the deferral, we've got a chance to talk to them.
It is worth noting that there's not a single planning committee member who's currently sat here going, no, this is a wonderful application, we've got to pass this.
Nobody, absolutely nobody.
Okay, right. Was there any other hands raised? Councillor Pico, I think brief.
Whilst it's been stressed that I've perhaps gone on about the parking, whatever it is, I don't actually like the appearance of it, but aesthetics is a personal view. Yeah? I think it looks out. I think it looks out of character with the rest of the town. It's going to look like a carbuncle on the end of the town centre. And I said, as I said in my discussions earlier on, unless you're going to demolish the rest of the town centre, or at least one side of it, yeah, it is going to look completely out of place in its current design. Now, whether that can be one of the reasons for refusal, then that's one of the things I would suggest. So I haven't laboured that point, because I can understand that aesthetics, as I said, are a personal thing. But perhaps there can be a planning case be made for the fact that it will look completely out of place, and there's no way the town centre can cover that. And I also think that somewhere along the line, and again, I feel that the images that we were given were misleading in their proportionality. And again, whether or not that can be somehow be used into it, because say the picture angles or the graphics they supplied were supplied at angles that made their building look less imposing than in actual fact it would be. So anyway, that's my.
Okay, all right then. No, thank you very much. Right, I think we've discussed this as long as we can this evening. So obviously a recommendation for approval, I don't think it's got any legs, but we obviously will go through the formalities. And then if that is lost approval, we then head into it's either one or two options. We either vote to defer to discuss issues around parking, and if that's one, then obviously we defer. Or if that's not one, we then head towards potential rejection. And if it is rejected, then we need to decide on what material reasons we're going to go down, and then obviously bring Lee in there for that point to give us a bit more advice around the risks involved of using certain material considerations. So just to confirm, what I'll do, I mean, look, we've got the recommendation 8.0 on page 113. That's recommendation A. Is anyone who'd like to recommend that? No, okay, there's no recommendations for A. Do we have to move to recommendation B, please?
Sure, that falls if I didn't pass.
Yeah. Right, so A's failed, so there's no reason to go into recommendation B. It doesn't really matter whether we go for deferral or rejection now, so if someone wants to raise their hand and
Propose that we defer.
Defer. Okay, so that's proposed by Councillor Lydiard. Is that seconded? Seconded by Councillor Watson. And the basis of the deferral would be, as discussed.
Yes, to look into the options on parking and under section 106 considerations.
Jeff, clarity on the NHS contribution as well.
Yeah.
And impact on church, sorry, parking impact on church and the
Under the deferral.
Yeah. We have to vote on deferral first, don't we?
Yeah. And if that's lost, we then go to reject. Let's simply deferral. Okay, so that has been.
Should we be voting on the rejection first? Because if the deferral, I'd support deferral if I lost rejection, but I'd still favour rejection. But you can't have a vote for deferral without, because it rejection.
Makes more sense to defer to
deferral. Right, so we've got deferral first, rejection first, then services.
Chair, the deferral's already been proposed and seconded, so we'll need to go ahead with that.
So you could, in theory,
No,
lose,
you don't.
lose the deferral.
Yeah,
go
if the
to rejection,
deferral.
lose the rejection, then go back to the deferral. You can do, can't you? I mean, that's because otherwise we're in no man's land, aren't we? So.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
we'll
okay.
see where the
Let's see where
deferral
the
goes
deferral
first.
Right, let's see where we end up. All those in favour of deferral for the reasons set out, please raise your hand. Deferral. This is deferral.
Don't defer your hand. This is round one on deferral.
Oh, this one. 4, 5, 6.
6 in favour of deferral. Okay, and all those against?
I need to have favour rejection.
Yeah. All right then. Okay. So, Lee, are you happy with that? Excellent. All right then. Good. Thank you. Right, so that's agenda item 9, Town Centre Car Park, King Street, Stamford Hope. That's been referred to next month. Just a very short bathroom break, ladies and gentlemen. We're reconvening 2 or 3 minutes.
It's a very, very short bathroom in your
James.
Where it started. I think everywhere further up the sense.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, agenda item 10, welcome back. Thanks for that. We'll now go on to the former Culver Centre and land rear of Bagelin Drive. Councillor Watson's removed herself from her seat, not to take part in this one. Okay, so with that, Ian, would you be so kind as to present your report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
This is the application for the Culver Centre site in Culver Field. The land is 4.5 hectare parcel of land located to the east of Bagelin Drive and west of Vale Gardens and Boxburn Drive. and to the north of Danbury Crescent, south of Short Academy, and use central on use. That's the application site. That's the current local plan policies map, which demonstrates with its age the former Culver Centre building on the west part of the site, the green area which is designated open space, and the remainder of the white land is non-designated land which is also used as open space. The application seeks permission for 173 houses in the form of 3 blocks of flats and the remainder being houses. The large area of open space will be retained within the centre of the site, which would be the equivalent of 98% of the designated open space from what was on the proposal map on the site before. The proposal includes 62 affordable flats. 69% would be affordable rent, the remainder would be in shared ownership. The flats in the block to the north side of the access road would be 3 and 4 storey building. Building to the south facing Dadeland Drive would be 3, 4 and 5 stories, and the block of flats facing the park, open space area, would be 3 and 4 stories. The houses would be a mixture of 2, 2.5 and full 3 stories houses. The main access would be from Dadeland Drive, which will come on to in a second. There'd be one equipped area of play and 4 local areas of unequipped areas of play. Then, as such, it's considered with the additional surveillance from the housing, the additional play equipment, and the overall quality with landscaping and biodiversity enhancements, that there'd be an overall qualitative improvement of the open space, albeit 2% reduction in comparison to the designated area of the open space. That's sections through the site. The areas surrounding the site includes a variety of 2, 3 and some distant from the site 4-storey buildings. Those immediately surrounding the site go up to 3 stories, and the heights of the buildings have been tiered to reflect the surrounding buildings. More sections of the site. This is the tallest building on the site, which is the one to the south of the access road. As I said, it goes up to 5 stories at its highest point, which would be closest to the entrance, dropping down to 3 stories where it's closer to the properties of Danbury Crescent. To the north of the access road, next to Sanctum and Reuse, is the 3 or 4-storey building, which is shown there. And that's the building, 2 of the elevations of the building that would face the open space. Again, 3 or 4-storey buildings. I've not included all the house types, there's 20 of them, but that's a selection of them there, the 2-storey houses that are proposed. And there's that's the 2.5-storey at the top and 3-storey at the bottom, full 3-storey. The access would be in the same position as the existing in order to achieve adequate visibility displays, clear of obstruction. The 2 existing lay-bys within Dadeland Drive would need to be built up, so would be returned as part of the pedestrian footpath. These are views of many photos. That's the north part of the entrance. That's again the frontage of the site as it currently is, with the lay-by that's to the north of the proposed access that would be removed. That's the existing access which would be used again, and the other lay-by to the south at the bottom. Shots of the former Culver Centre site, which went through the Section 77 application route to be proven to be surplus to requirements. On that basis, there's no objection from officers to the loss of the education land, because the buildings and the uses long since passed. They're the neighbouring properties of Central Use, which 3-storey blocks, and there's a pedestrian route leading through Bale Gardens from Dadeland Drive and that passes the Shaw Academy, which the development would move slightly further to the north, so that would be replaced with the main route passing through the site. These properties to the east. That's Coalfield itself. Proposal will involve the loss of 34 trees or groups of trees out of the 48 that are at the site, but there'll be substantial replacement planting proposed as part of the proposal. The Danbury Crescent properties, which are to the south. So overall, proposal is 173 dwellings, 35% affordable, 31% of which will be shared ownership, and the remainder would be affordable rent. The site is currently partially vacant, currently partially designated open space and partially non-designated, and over 98% of the equivalent amount of open space will be provided at the site, so of 98% of the designated open space. Parking is provided at a rate of 1 space per flat, 2 spaces per dwelling, with 25 visitor spaces, 4 of which would be disabled. Electric parking would be secured through condition. In terms of planning obligations, we're seeking to secure obligations in respect of education, healthcare, off-site highway works, which will be a contribution towards improvements of Four Place Junction, and the affordable housing which we've spoken about. The position of officers is that all dwellings within and flats within the development will be served by adequate living conditions and adequate light. The effect on neighbours would be acceptable because all dwellings would be at least 21 metres from the nearest part of any other dwelling within the development. There's an energy strategy provided with the application which shows a 41% reduction of energy usage in comparison to building regs as per 2013 standards. And there would be an upturn in economic boost from the site, particularly during the construction period of 2 years, as well as additional revenues for the nearby shops, which is the South Ockenden Centre, which is particularly close to the site. For all of these reasons, it's recommended that the application is approved.
Okay, thank you. All right then, thanks for that report. Open to questions. Councillor Thatcher.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's really interesting. Well, something I just wanted to check. Talks a fair bit to the development team. One of the I thought quite encouraging aspects of their plan after consultation was that they were proposing to work with local people as to how that open space, that green space, was to be used, what kind of facilities, etc. Now that doesn't appear in here. Is that because it's one of the planning specific issue, or?
We would secure the landscaping scheme with the applicant through a condition. We probably goes beyond the necessity of a planning condition to require a local input. But if the applicants want to do so, then there's no reason why they couldn't. But to make it wouldn't be necessary to make the development acceptable for that to occur.
I mean, it may or may not be necessary, but that was one of the key points to get on the selling points for the team. I would have expected that to see that part of our conditions for the other.
So but for the purposes to see your point about necessity, but for the purposes of the condition to meet the tests that are required for the NPPF, it has to be necessary to be reasonable.
Any further questions there? Councillor Libby.
Just a quick one. You mentioned affordable housing. How is that different from social housing? I'm thinking, rent is quite a lot different. And why shouldn't it be social housing rents?
We share the 31% of the housing would be shared ownership. Of the affordable housing would be shared ownership. The remainder is affordable rent, which is a category of rented affordable housing. It's different in its operation and set up to social rent. Affordable housing, it's got 80% up to 80% rental on compared to the open market values. It's roughly my understanding.
And that's the norm these days, isn't it?
It's what our housing team are looking for, us certainly in this development, I believe in most developments.
Okay, no further hands are raised there. Oh, Councillor Pollard?
Do we know if we have a partner for the shared ownership?
No.
We don't know. And going back to Councillor Fletcher's point that you mentioned, although it's not a condition, it can be noted that we would like the developer to have that community engagement and discuss with the local residents on the use of that open space. Thank you. That's it.
Yeah. Is that acceptable?
It's pretty much putting a promises onto that.
Thank you.
Any further questions? No? Okay. Okay, so with that, we have a speaker statement in support. This is the agent, Will Lusty. Will, if you'd like to come down, and you have 3 minutes in which to present your case. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Will Lusty. I'm from Savills, and we're the planning agents for these proposals. I'd like to thank the Chair for the opportunity to speak, and officers for the committee reports, and say that I fully agree with the recommendation to approve this application. Local and national policy actively encourages the delivery of new homes on brownfield sites within existing built-up areas. The NPPF expects this to include affordable housing. The proposals represent an opportunity for the development of this park brownfield site within the existing settlement of South Ockenden, which is currently underutilised and partly vacant. It will help meet identified housing needs, including a policy compliant level of affordable housing, as well as provide high quality public open space and associated green infrastructure. The scheme will provide 173 new high quality homes and comprise a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom apartments and 2 and 3 bedroom family houses. 62 dwellings will be affordable, 36% of the total number of units proposed. In addition, the scheme includes the reprovision of substantial residential space, retention, as we've heard, of 98% of the designated public open space on the Culver Field. Council's community needs and open spaces study identifies the Culver Field as low in terms of both quality and value. The proposals offer the opportunity to provide space that is significantly improved quality and diversity to accommodate both current and forecast needs. This will include a local park, natural, semi-natural, green space, amenity space, and children's play typologies, as well as enhanced connectivity. This is in accordance with the Council's open space standards and addresses deficits in the play space in the local area. It has been revised following an extensive 14-month pre-application process. Subject to consultation involving a live web page, leaflet drops, and 2 in-person consultation events. Final design of the park, landscaping, and improvements to Culver Field directly response to the feedback from residents received during both public consultation events was considered by the Council's landscaping. Is supported by the Council's landscaping in the Culver. The scheme will provide a policy compliant level of car and cycle parking to serve future residents as well as visitors. All existing pedestrian cycle routes into and through the site will be retained and enhanced as part of the proposals. Through planning obligations, the applicant is committed to provide financial contributions towards education, healthcare, and off-site highways works. To summarise the key benefits, the delivery of 173 high-quality homes to include 62 affordable homes, regeneration of an underutilised and park vacant brownfield site to positively enhance the character and appearance of the local area, careful design to protect nearby residential amenity, include enhanced public open space, and finally, Section 106 contributions towards education provision of site highways works. Therefore, respectfully request that the application be approved in accordance with the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. All right then, any further questions based on that speaker statements?
Just interested to find out who's actually going to maintain this state afterwards. Is it the council or is it some third party arrangement? Because, you know, in Tilbury you've got 2 estates that are managed by sort of external agencies. One is okay, 2 are really poor. So who's going to be maintaining this?
Which I understand the intention will be the council, through the landscaping scheme would include an element of management for the open space and the all of that areas. And if the highways are adopted, then they'd be adopted. They'd be maintained by the council in that respect.
Yeah, you know, it's very good news. I think you are right. Some of the amendments are recorded, so how we can monitor that or what we can do in the future, but certainly, yeah, the difference between the good maintenance and the bad ones is huge. Any further hand raised? No, okay, so we're going to debate.
Sorry, Chair, before you go into debate, did you want to suspend standing orders now?
Yeah, sure, and I'd like to suspend standing orders until 9:30. That will allow us to conduct our business. Is that all agreed? Agreed. Excellent. Does anyone want to start debate before we go? Councillor Fletcher.
Long time got sweet in that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. This one's had a bit of an interesting journey. It was one of a number of proposed sites for building in South Uffington, one of which local residents felt very strongly about, and some of which we managed with their help to get withdrawn. Calder Centre one was always a bit more of a slightly less black and white situation. You look at the Calder site itself, it's a mess. It's a site for fly tipping. It was always going to make sense to put that site to better use. Calder Field, on the other hand, although it's described here as low in quality and value, well, its value comes in how it's used. It's used a lot by the local community, everything from football to walking their dogs. And I think a key concern for the local community is that as much as possible that green space should be kept, should be preserved. During the two consultation processes, I do think that the council's planning team did a lot of listening. Really pleased when the revised proposal came back. Inevitably, it wasn't quite as much of the green space as we wanted. It was a lot more than we'd originally seen. It did appear that the local people were being listened to. There are some local people who don't want any building there at all. At the risk of getting shot, I think, to a degree, when you're looking at 32,000 homes being needed to be built around the borough, some extra building in South Uffington is inevitable, and I'd rather that some of that building, or most of that building, went on to the Calder site than some of the rather implausible small green spaces that were being looked at last year and before. I think it's always going to be a question of balance. Personally, I think the balance achieved is quite good. I am concerned, though, that some of the commitments that were given by the planning team in consultation, such as working with local people to decide in the end how that green space was used, should remain in the proposal and not be left up to the applicant. So the applicant would be quite happy. That was planning team's proposal. Was agreed with local people. From that point of view, I think the council should be championing it. So for my money, I like how this proposal is now, given that we were always going to see building on the Calder site itself. I think it's a good balance, but I do want to make sure that the local community are involved as much as possible in what gets put, particularly in the home.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else comment on Councillor Polly?
Councillor Fletcher and myself both are representatives of Bilateral, where this development is, and much of what Councillor Fletcher said I will echo. I don't think some of the photographs show the level of fly tipping that has been going on that side. It was certainly earlier this year, May time, it was quite an eyesore. We have come a long way from the original drawings, and I think that is to be commended, that people have been listened to. We're never going to get a perfect scheme that makes everybody happy, but I think it's come a long way from its original concept, and it would be good with that note, to the developers continue that community engagement. And on the side that I attended, I was able to attend last night a community engagement event in Broxton Drive. Just made me realise that people were still asking about this site and still, and there was because you're available and you're speaking to people and they feel involved in the development process, they're much more warm into it, they're much more rather, and they don't find it so impactful. That's been my experience. So, you know, just as a message going forward, if we can try and encourage that as much as possible, and going forward, there will be a lot more pre-application meetings required in reforms and planning. So, good work so far, and thank you. We can carry it on.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other hands raised? All right, just before we get to the vote then, Lee, was there anything there that could be added to the answer?
I think the use of informs that we mentioned about use of best was actually doing the applicant. So the condition might not have particular role, but the informs that could be added.
Okay. All right, right, there's no further hands raised. So there is a recommendation 8.1 on page 160. Would anyone like to recommend? Councillor Lydiard, I'll second that. Okay, so all those in favour, please raise your hands. Okay, and that's raised us unanimous across the committee. Okay, so with that we can say that agenda item 10, former Culver Centre, has been approved. All right, then, so just over an hour left, and 3 more items on the agenda. So we'll see how we get on, and then at 9 o'clock, it's like over. Excellent. Nadia, would you be so kind to present 63 Wolf Road, agenda item 11? Thank you.
Chair. I'm glad we got to this one. Any questions? So, this application relates to land at the rear of 63 Wharf Road in Stamford Host. Members may recall this site where an application was considered and determined as a refusal for 7 bungalows in October last year. There were 5 reasons for refusal for that previous application. Just for members, as a reminder really, I've got those to hand if you're interested. This revised application has been submitted seeking the demolition of the bungalow to create the access to allow for the erection of 4 semi-detached chalets with parking and amenity space. The site lies within a residential area and there is no land use objection to the development of the site, subject to compliance with development management policies. The proposal seeks to create a cul-de-sac to the rear of the bungalows on this narrow strip of land between Wharf Road and Stamford Hope Primary School. The layout proposed bears no relationship to the existing pattern of development, and the amount of site coverage to plot size significantly exceeds that of the neighbouring plots. It's also noted that there would be very little separation distance between the flank walls of the proposed chalet dwellings and the rear boundaries of the plots, with the dwellings on, with the plots of the dwellings in Wharf Road. The proposal would appear cramped and contrived as a result, and as a result of that, be harmful to the character and appearance of the area, and is recommended for refusal for this reason. Here are some elevations and floor plans of the proposed 2-storey dwellings, and some images of the street scene in Wharf Road. The top image, it shows the access without the existing bungalow at number 63. The lower image shows the bungalow in situ. There's some more detailed layout images of the proposed access and the parking spaces proposed serving the 4 dwellings. The scheme would provide 9 parking spaces free of the accessway, which would be substandard for 4 4-bed dwellings, which would ordinarily require 12 parking spaces. Highways have raised concerns about the number of spaces proposed. In addition, there are also highway concerns regarding the siting of the access opposite Caverns Crescent, which could potentially lead to a safety hazard, along with concerns regarding the detailed design of the access and the turning head, particularly with regards to larger vehicle access. And the proposal is also recommended for refusal due to highway safety concerns. Some site images for members. 63 Wharf Road and where the site access is proposed. Looking up Wharf Road there. And looking southeast from Wharf Road, facing the rear access behind Grove Road. There's the rear access there. And that's looking down the rear access with the application site on your left, with the chain link fencing there, and from the opposite direction with the site on your right, with the properties on Wharf Road in the background. This is looking towards the site from the Stamford Hope Primary School. And that's the boundary of the site there, with just beyond it, Wharf Road properties there. And looking into across the site there, which is broadly overgrown, and you can see the property boundaries with Wharf Road beyond. And the view from the southwest from the school field again. Looking across the site, and looking across the site again. It's predominantly scrubland with some hedgerow and some other vegetation on the site. View of the rear boundaries from 57 to 71 Wharf Road. And to summarise, the application is considered contrary to council policies and is recommended to members for refusal on page 185.
Fantastic, thank you, Nadia. Okay, so questions. Who would like to start? Councillor Howard.
Thanks, Chair. Nadia, just to be clear, the third bullet point, the lack of ecology surveys, obviously the applicant could just get those ecology surveys done to wipe out that concern, but that in no way would change the other concerns about the site being overly cramped, etc.
Correct.
So all the other, in the reports, I think there are 4 or 5 areas in which the report highlights that the applicant hasn't necessarily answered everything he should under the local authority. Even if all those things would be ticked off, the material substantial planning complaints, these are not areas where we're waiting for more information.
No.
We've got the information, we've assessed it, and it's contrary to policy.
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
Okay, no further hands raised. All right, so go straight to speaker statements. So I've got 3 speaker statements. The first is a statement of an objection. That's from the Keith Major. Keith, if you're here, please read out your statement. You've got 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the residents of Wharf Road and the surrounding roads, I'd like to make objections to the plans to build 4 houses on land to the rear of 63 Wharf Road. For those of us who have homes which back directly onto the proposed houses, we believe not only will our privacy be compromised by the development, but the proposed houses will not be afforded the privacy required. Several of the existing properties have loft conversions, which would directly overlook the rear gardens of the proposed houses. And our homes and gardens will be overlooked by the proposed houses. On closer inspection of the plans, it's clear that the side wall of the dwellings will be too close, less than 2 metres to the rear walls of our properties, particularly number 67, which has been misrepresented on the proposed site layout. Assuming that the width of the parking spaces is the standard 2.4 metres, then it can be seen that there's approximately 1 metre of land either side of the proposed houses. As the boundary of the land is less than 12 metres from the rear wall of 67, and the side wall of the proposed houses must be at least 2 metres from the boundary, pushing the far side wall over the school boundary. So in short, the land is too narrow and too close to existing properties to be. I would like to bring to the attention of the committee the objection to the development by Stamford Hope Primary School, the school field of which would be directly overlooked by the development, and the boundary trees of which would be compromised by the foundations of any houses built on the site. We have video and photographic evidence of hedgehogs and grass snakes which frequent the site, and in addition we regularly see bats, common lizards, bees, and occasionally badgers on the site and in our gardens. The proposed houses have all been designed with gable ends which are out of character with the current bungalows, all of which have hip ends. Gable ends are cheaper to build than hip ends, and like in excess of 6 metres will impose over the rear gardens of the existing properties. When this piece of land was last brought to the committee, it was questioned why it would be considered a loss of amenity. I'd like to answer that question. For those of us who live along this busy section of Wharf Road, the fronts of our homes are regularly passed by HGVs going to and from the Stanhope Industrial Estate. Therefore, many of us use the rooms at the rear of our properties as our living rooms, places where we spend our family time. This development is allowed to go ahead, and we will lose the outlook that we're accustomed to from our living rooms and kitchens, which is a line of trees and open skies. The fact that the land itself has become messy is because the current owner of the land has neglected the land and allowed it to become that way. Given the opportunity, the local residents would like to take control of the land, clear the mess there, and make the land into a benefit for the local community. It is our view that due to the proximity of the planned development to several overlooking properties, it would be an extremely unpleasant place to live. It should be rejected as such.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, that leads us to our second statement of objection, and that's Shane Head, the ward councillor. Shane, would you like to come say who you are?
I didn't know I was meant to do that earlier. Sorry.
3 minutes in which you give your statement.
Thank you, committee. I'm going to speak on behalf of residents Wharf Road and hope to articulate it anywhere near as good as Mr. Meg did. I'm speaking on behalf of residents who are directly affected by the proposed development of the second version forthcoming of this planning committee planning application, which I believe this committee refused back in October 2020. To be clear, I fully support residents' objections to this proposal. Worthy of note is a scheme for 4 units refused back in 1988 and was dismissed on appeal. So this is a 33-year-old problem. This isn't new, believe it or not. So I present the following considerations. The revised proposal would still, by reasons of layout, scale and sitting, be an undesirable overdevelopment of the site, which detracts from and would be out of keeping with the prevailing character and appearance of the surrounding area. It would be in contraventions of policies CSTP22, CSTP23 and PMD2 of the Thurrock LDF Core Strategy and Policies document I have here, and the provisions within Chapter 12 of the National Planning Policy Framework. The second point is around inadequate access and egress arrangements. We maintain that access and egress, notwithstanding the design changes, may remain fundamentally flawed by design. As stated earlier, Wharf Road is the only access into the Stanhope Industrial Estate, and as such accommodates up to 500 heavy goods vehicle movements per day between the hours of 7 AM and 1900 hours. That equates to 41 HGV movements, one every 1.5 minutes. Whilst the application may have changed, the fact remains as consistent as it has for years. The area is a permitted parking area, we talked about that a little earlier, and that also needs consideration. For those in these new properties, we need to be able to park quite rightly on Wharf Road, which is, as I've already articulated, very heavily burdened. The points above mean that egress from the development is a reasonably foreseeable highway safety risk, not just to motorists, but pedestrians using the road to get to the local school, with vehicles pulling out into the road frequented by HGV movements as described. Not to mention emergency service access would be impaired down the isolated end. That is visible for everyone to see. The overall layout is fundamentally the same as previous schemes by virtue of the shape of the site, with the proximity of the new builds to the rear of the properties in Wharf Road. The new design remains nearly as dense, which will prevent significant enough separation of amenity space for existing residents and those who may live in these new properties. And like I said earlier, Mr. Baker made that point perfectly. Chapter 12 of the NPPF, paragraph 127, subsection F, refers to creating spaces that are accessible and which promote health and well-being, and where crime and disorder and the fear of crime do not undermine the quality of life. This application sits directly next to neighbouring households, will impede on private amenity, and doesn't feature at the forefront of the street. It is partially recessed. Those of us who live in SS17 know of off-road developments like on the other side of the train station and at the far end of Wharf Road, only half a mile away, suffer with some illicit activity in those areas. Positive development should integrate positively into existing community street scenes. We hope committee members reflect on the real material considerations that we have raised on behalf of residents and take these into consideration when forming and concluding a decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that takes us on to our last speaker, which is a statement of support. That's Gary Pottershall, the agent, and Wendy, is that virtual, yeah? So great.
Yeah. Yes. When you're ready, Gary.
Good evening, members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. Members will remember that this scheme was previously voted on and voted to approve for 8 retirement bungalows. The client at that time failed to produce a suitable 106 agreement, and therefore the application did not proceed. The recent refusal was 7 units, but our understanding is that that application was not refused on reasons of density. The density of this development is low, at less than 20 dwellings per hectare. This is in line with council policy. In respect of highways, the highways report has been submitted with this application and has provided a robust statement to show that the application is acceptable in respect of highway grounds. It should be noted that the application is for 4 3-bedroom units which require 2 parking spaces per dwelling. This is in line with council policy. This application meets that policy. Access and egress to the site is from a suitably designed access road and is safer than the current arrangements for the existing property, which often had to reverse into the so busy road that has been described. A preliminary ecological assessment has been submitted with the application. This confirms there are no endangered species on the site. Residents have suggested that the land has been left untidy and deliberately overgrown. It should be noted that the applicant started to clear the land and was immediately telephoned by the council and accused of starting work. He has therefore not fully cleared the land. The areas that were clear were found to have items of disregarded tyres, sofas and garden waste, which he could only assume had been put over the fence of the neighbouring properties. The prevailing character of the properties in Rolfe Road are bungalows, many of which have been extended to the rear and into the roof space. We therefore suggest that the design currently reflects the prevailing character of the area. We believe the application responds positively to the previous reasons for refusal, and with those items in mind, we welcome the committee to approve this development this evening. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. All right then, so is there any other questions based on those speaker statements? Councillor Watson?
Can I just ask a question on like the parking and actually, so you've got the exit going in, it looks like you've got 3 parking spaces. How on a Monday morning at 7 in the morning, the environmental truck, the rubbish bin turn up, do they reverse up there? Or because is there any turning or anything?
Yeah, this is from a hardware point of view. It's got a turning area, but actually physically you can't get a refuse vehicle in there. They said that they will provide a refuse strategy where people would leave their bins part of the way up the road, because the actual access itself is not physically big enough to actually get a large vehicle in. So that's one of our highways concerns. Could a fire engine actually get in that access? It's all well and good providing a turning facility down at the bottom, but if a large vehicle can't get in there in the first place, then obviously that provides highway concerns. Yeah, it would be. I don't think even reversing a refuse vehicle get that down there, because it's only got 3 metre radii, which is very narrow. Yeah, on a normal development, we would expect minimum of 4.5 and probably 6 metres. And obviously that would, the radius of that vehicle would take it into the access of the property adjoining, because it's that close to the next access next door current load. And obviously that would then, we've also got the conflict with the access to the other state road, which is, they don't actually meet the proper entrance in. It doesn't quite meet the scale of the offset.
That's what we perceive, is it? Because you've got waste strategy where you're going to bring all the bins halfway down across the road. Like
Yeah,
when you're trying to get in yourself to your own house, you're not going to go very far, really, are you? With a bin, like a local blue bin sitting in front of you. And I would assume that would be the same for an ambulance though as well.
Both fire engines and ambulances are quite rigid vehicles, so they have quite a big turning circle. My suspicions are to get in, they might have to ride over the curb to get in.
And the cars.
Cars will be fine. Cars are okay.
And then
Larger vehicles.
No, I mean, like, fire engine would just have a car out on the road.
We would, but it is quite narrowish. You probably have to ride over. If the people parked in those parking bays along the side, it may well have to go over the footway.
So, can I just ask another thing? In terms of the houses, is the width of the house either side, to the actual boundary line of the school is how much? And how does that overlook the school playing field?
To answer your second part of the question, it doesn't directly overlook because there are no windows in that flank that would be.
Yeah, that's a school.
Yeah, there's just the first floor is just an ensuite window. Ground floor is a secondary living area window / kitchen window and a utility back door. But in terms of the distance, I need to grab my scale. Well, give me 1 second. I can give you an approximate, but I can give you an accurate, which I'd rather do. Thank you. Changes of not having your usual stuff with you. Right, now I'm getting myself sorted. Just to clarify, there are no windows proposed in the flanks, full stop. So there would be no overlooking at all. And this is a bit of a guesstimate, but I can give you a very accurate guesstimate at least. Are we talking? We're talking a metre tops.
A metre.
A metre. A metre to the boundary, and that's measured from the flanks of the pairs of semis to the boundaries of the primary school. You know, 1.2 is being generous.
Okay, Councillor Fletcher. Thanks, Chair. Just going back to this question of access, particularly for emergency vehicles. If I understand rightly, it doesn't matter how many houses you put on that T in the back. That is always going to be a problem. So in effect, it doesn't matter how many.
I don't want to speak for Julian from a highway safety point of view, but we have consistently had concerns about, firstly, the sighting of the access immediately opposite Cadence Present, and it putting out onto Wharf Road, the likelihood of potential conflict with a number of different vehicles turning into both accesses is an issue. Its width from its design is a concern, and irrespective, as you say, as to the number of units there.
So it's not big.
It's certainly, we haven't had an application for many years that's come forward that has shown to be acceptable or suitable. It doesn't cause then other problems.
Councillor Howden. The applicant said, Nadia, that the previous application wasn't rejected at all because of density issues. However, the conclusions that the council come to regarding the harm to character and appearance of the area, the harmful aspect to highways, all those points stand in perfect isolation and are perfectly valid. So reading the planning inspectorate's view for pretty concrete reasons why he was turned down, Essentially, we've got a new slate of reasons why they should be turned down, in addition to the existing reasons.
We do, and just to, if you don't mind me just clarifying further, the previous application that came before members for 7 bungalows in October last year was put forward for refusal for 5 reasons. I've double checked those reasons for refusal, and I can confirm, if you go to page 186 in the agenda where you've got your 4 reasons for refusal in front of you, the reasons the application was put forward to members and agreed previously for refusal, number 1 is identical. Number 3 is identical. Number 4 is identical. Number 2, which refers to layout, scale, design and unacceptable impacts upon neighbouring amenity by reason of overlooking for this particular application. The previous application referred to layout and design and poor visual outlook because of the orientation of the 7 bungalows. They have 4 to 5 metre deep back gardens looking directly into the back gardens of those bungalows on Wharf Road. So it's a poor outlook concerns there. So it's a variation of the wording, but it still was contrary to PMD 1 and 2 as per reason for refusal 2. And there was actually a 5th reason for refusal on the previous application regarding a ecology assessment that was considered to be required at that time because the site was overgrown. The landscape and ecology advisor on this application said because the land was substantially cleared in between the 2 applications, much of what could have been found has already been removed. But nonetheless, and so there was no reason to have a reason to object to the proposal due to the lack of an ecology appraisal in this application itself, but there is still a need for a mitigation for RAMs and ecology, which hasn't come forward. So that is the 4th reason for refusal. As I say, that's identical. And just, can I just also add at this opportunity, with regards to the speaker's statement regarding density that the applicant put forward, saying this would comply with the council's density policies. As members will be aware, density is only one matter within our sort of palette of options to consider within all applications. And whilst you may be able to fit 4 houses on this narrow strip, that doesn't take into account layout, design, orientation, impact on neighbours, highway matters, and other issues. It's just a number, quite honestly.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? No, okay, so we're heading into debate. Would anyone like to start this evening before we head to a vote? Has anyone got any comments to make? No? No, Councillor Watson?
So, to me personally on this scheme, I know this probably might happen what you Chair. The houses are lovely, not here. Basically. So had a lot of issues for me. Access being probably the most major one on an emergency service basis, and also overlooking story and being just 1 metre away from either side. So on that basis, maybe I'm gone above the debate and going into it. I'm not.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any comments before we head to the vote? No, nothing to add. No, I generally agree with that. I think 4 reasons for refusal is quite heavy. I think certainly sometimes you've got 1 or 2, sometimes clear those, but I think when you're looking at 4, I think there's more work to be done there. So with that, there is a recommendation 8.0 on page 183. Councillor Watson, did you want to recommend?
I'll recommend
refusal, yeah, and is that seconded by Councillor Polly? All those in favour of the recommendation, which is refusal, please raise your hand. Okay. And Grace, that's unanimous across the committee. Yeah, okay. So with that, agenda item 11, 63 has been refused. Thank you. Right, before we go any further, let's just have a check the time.
It's almost 9 o'clock now, to 5 to 9.
Okay, just give us 2 seconds. Obviously, we have Okay, right, we've got 2 items left on the agenda, which is, we've got obviously Land Park, Greenacre now. We've got 30 minutes left, obviously we do have to be out of here. So what we'll do, we'll see how this one goes. But obviously, if not, we'll defer the last item to next month, depending on how quickly we do this one. So we're looking at agenda item 12, that's land part of Greenacre and Dean, High Road Fobbing. Lucy, could you present your report?
Okay, this is an application for planning permission for 8 single-storey detached dwelling houses over 55 with associated parking and amenity areas. There are the following updates from when the report was published. We've had submission of a letter from an estate agent stating from the applicant stating there's been lots of interest in this which has been built to this side. I'll come on to that later. Also, Fobbing Farm Shop is nearby, so it's nearby, and they've also offered £250,000 towards affordable the off-site. Okay, so this is the site here. So yeah, it's along High Road Fobbing, near to Whitehall Lane, away from the historical centre. Okay, this is an aerial photograph. So this here, so Greenacre itself is not part of this application, so that's gonna.
So the translation is this
Sorry,
is a reception service.
Yeah, I should have highlighted that bit, sorry. But, okay.
These two don't get out much.
This is the local plans policy map, and the green shows that the site is within Greenbelt, but it is actually this site here, which is the very final, which is in counted as established residential frontage within Greenbelt, but that just relates to frontage, not kind of building behind it. Right, this is the proposed site layout. So the 8 units which are being proposed are these ones here. So the ones in the middle and that there. What's in the blue line is a 5-unit scheme, the same for single-storey over 55 housing, which was approved by a committee against officer recommendation 6 months ago-ish. Okay, this is just an example of, there's 4 different house types. This is an example of a couple of the proposed elevations. This is Fibonacci 2 and Fibonacci 3. So you'll be able to see that the elevations are not of high quality. The design of the facades appears almost utilitarian. Additionally, the appearance is unbalanced and confused, creating an awkward finish. There are large areas of blank wall which contribute to the unattractive aesthetics of the properties. Okay, let's right, so that is opening there, and then the access to the site is shared with the 5 units which were approved. Then this is a more kind of, it's a
aerial of the site. So yeah, this is see opening, and then this area to the rear. So it's a large kind of green area with trees around it. So that's where the development is proposed. Okay, the site is within Greenbelt, and we've not pulled in one of the exceptions to inappropriate development set out in the PDF. It would result in inappropriate development in Greenbelt, which by definition is harmful to openness. Proposal would introduce significant built form into an area which is currently open and has no development. Therefore, the development would encroach on the openness of Greenbelt. There's no very special circumstances. That was 8 put forward, but they're assessed in the report 6.17 paragraph onwards. And so, yeah, we don't consider that the circumstances together these a case of very special circumstances. Additionally, the proposal is clearly designed as one proposal. So I just want to go back. I'll go. Yeah, so the development is clearly designed as one proposal. So this takes the number over 10 units, which then means that affordable housing should have been supplied. So with 35%, that would be five units which have been put forward. The applicant has offered a contribution of £250,000 for an off-site contribution, and clearly that's way below what 5 units would be. Okay, to summarise, the application is undeveloped site within Greenbelt. It's inappropriate and harmful by definition and to openness, and the very special circumstances to outweigh the harm of the proposal. So to conclude, recommendations to refuse for reasons 1, 2 and 3 is set out in the report.
Okay, thank you. All right then, that leads us to questions. Considering how damage-free reasons for refusal are, I'd be right in assuming that if this hadn't actually been called in by the waterman, it's probably just would have been rejected under Gateable Forest. So the application seems so one-sided. The question why it was included. Any questions here? Right, so now it takes us on to speaker statements. We have a statement which have support, and that's from Chris Nixon and Chris
Nixon. Oh, was he on? Oh, sorry, I thought.
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry.
No.
Can you hear me?
Chris Nixon was the one who's supposed to be. He's here, but now he's changed his mind.
Sorry, no. I'm presenting, if that's possible. There's been I've spoken to Grace at Council Services. There was a problem driving down. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nick Westlake. I'm acting as the agent for this application and speaking in favour of the proposal. Thank you for the chance to speak on the development this evening. The application's been advertised with a press notice, a site notice, and 23 letters of consultation were sent out to the immediate neighbouring properties, i.e. those most likely to find objection to the proposal. There were 6 letters of support. Some even suggested an interest in living there. There was not a single letter of objection received. Clearly, the people of Thurrock want this development to take place. Thurrock has a significant housing shortage, and this application can help with this housing deficit. We firmly believe the benefits of approving this development would significantly outweigh the adverse impacts of the proposal. What is proposed can be described as limited infilling in the village. It is permitted by both local and national policy. There are 5 dwellings approved to the immediate north. There is existing development to the east and to the west of the site, and the application simply infills this gap, leaving a green block to the front of the site. The very special circumstances have been introduced to highlight the benefits of the development, simply beyond saying they are for the over 55s. We are happy to secure the age-related housing via legal agreement. Disappointingly, the very special circumstances have been largely dismissed, despite the site bit to the immediate north for 5 dwellings being viewed completely differently at committee in this regard less than 12 months ago. The previous approval was given special circumstances on the grounds that the council did not have a 5-year land supply. They were tailored bungalows for the over 55s of limited height, so they could be bungalows only, i.e. no conversions of the roof. There would be less stress on the NHS as the bungalows would be level access, so there'll be less accidents internally. Demand was shown via the document produced by Housing Strategy in Thurrock Council, demonstrating that 3,400 houses will be required up to 2031, or 210 units a year, clearly demonstrating local expected demand. Rightmove shows there are no 1-beds in Thurrock and barely a dozen 2-beds. There are no specifically designed bungalows for the retired. It's a sustainable location. There are 2 bus stops within 30 seconds walk of the site. There are employment sites to the north and shops at 5 Bells Roundabout. Fobbing Farm Shop is open 7 days a week. It's 10 minutes walk to the south. The design is inventive, eternal design that can be easily adapted and suitable for the needs of the elderly, fully Part M compliant. Construction in the local phase, short term. We offered a 1-year start time, and also the local plan clearly says that you need dwellings for the over 55s. How can all of these factors disappear less than 12 months on? Only substantial weight was given to the housing supply figures, when before very substantial weight was offered. We've got no weight for being within the established residential frontage, yet Thamesview Farm for 9 dwellings, some 70 metres to the south, got limited weight for this. We've got a highly sustainable building with solar panels, car charging points, air source heat pumps. We get no weight for this, despite the MPPF requiring buildings to be sustainable. Even the following case on the agenda got limited weight for employment creation. We got nothing, and our local developer is living from fobbing. In terms of affordable housing, the first we were made aware of this was when we read it in the committee report. As the 2 sites have been linked, we've offered 250,000 without prejudice towards affordable housing. And with regards to design, we believe that that's a subjective judgment. We've advertised these locally for 3 weeks. We've had 30 names and numbers of people wanting to move into them. Thank you for the chance to speak. Please listen to the local people and support this proposal. Thank you.
Okay then, so based on that statement there, do we have any further questions? No further questions. So to clarify,
just pretty quickly, how has this become phase 2 and not a separate application? It was put in under a separate application, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's true. I suppose it's a judgment call, but I think the fact that it shares the access road and is the same developer, same agent, and same design of houses over 55s, it's clearly going to be read as one development.
So that could be case law, should we say, or not case law, but that would be a strong argument for 106.
Well, definitely, yeah.
Okay.
Am I right in understanding that the applicant was saying that he didn't know about the required percentages of affordable housing?
I have to admit, I haven't had the conversation with them, but
But this applicant, I recognise the name, this applicant has put applications forward in Thurrock before, and they don't know about the 35%.
they definitely know about the 35%, but it was, I suppose they thought, because they submitted two applications, two minor applications, that it wasn't going to be an issue. So, yeah, when writing up the report,
I mean, I raised it
became
because this
clear.
statement suggests, oh, we only know just at the last minute. Well, if you've done work for us before, you know what we asked for. Quit coming the raw prawns, don't
What, so the offer there is 10% to 250k. Obviously, it's 35%, isn't it? So that's way below the, so it's 250k. Normally, you would argue for 7, it's over 750.
We haven't got.
No, but I'm just, if it was, that's 10%, so 25k is 10%.
Joe, maybe first 1% on site. The policy would require that. It's policy compliant, and this is also below that and it's on site.
Yeah. Okay then, any further questions? No, I mean, it was on me last year myself, but I think,
So there is, you've obviously feel that they're going to be consistent with it.
No. I think let's head to the vote. There's no further questions. So there is a recommendation there, 8.0, which is to review on page 206. I've not heard anyone speak in favour, so I will go to that vote. Would anyone like to recommend refusal? Councillor Fletcher, and then seconded by Councillor Watson. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Sorry, all those in favour of refusal.
We're joined on nice already.
What you want it? Do you want to withdraw it or do you want to go for it?
This is, we're voting to. I'll say it again.
Just to put the recommendation
Set the
of
recommendation
refusal.
for refusal. So everyone's hands on the
Plus, that's
yeah, no, because even if you. Yeah, thank you. Right, everyone's hands up. Sorry. That was unanimous, so we don't need to go to a second vote there. So that's agenda item 12, land park, green, being highlight problem. Okay, thank you. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and
Chair, I don't know, I think you might already come to the decision. I think the debate requires, this last one requires more than 15 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I know the agent, it depends what I remember, I know the agent actually didn't want it, he didn't want it that time. That was a request from them, but what's everyone's thinking? Did you go with the council Fletcher actually probably deserves more than 15 minutes?
I think we've got a couple of members missing, so if we did start it tonight, the next planning committee, I don't know how council can vote again, so perhaps just delaying it would be better rather than having a very stilted committee next time.
Okay, I see what, Nicola?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it might be well to defer it because we don't want to give the applicant the opportunity to say that we rushed the decision because of the applicant.
Yeah.
So which would be his first comeback.
Okay, so what I'll do, some general members are in agreement with that, in general, yeah? And I know that the applicant didn't want her tonight anyway, so.
It was confident to keep it to the
Yeah.
so planning, we need to discuss.
Okay then, so that's planning committee at 9:15. Has anyone with that one item to be referred to the next meeting?